This happened when I was probably 7 or 8. When I was a kid, I lived in a pretty sketchy neighbourhood. We lived in those long apartments. Ones are attached to the sides rather than stacked on top of each other. The front of the apartment faced a main road, and there's a little street to access the park and woods and back area of the apartment. Behind the apartment is a massive field and a forest. Me and my friends and I used to go there to build hobbit holes in the grass. My mum hated it when we went out there because there were some rough people that lived in the neighbourhood. She didn't like the idea of 7-year-olds playing out there in the same place where people do drugs. I'm adding some more details so you can get a picture. Now one day, I was out in the woods by myself, just exploring and pretending to be Indiana Jones or something, and I was coming out of the tall grass. I could see the little back alley in between the parking area and the woods, and I saw something lying in the grass. I believe it's a deer. I think it's just sleeping, so I creep up on it, trying to not scare it. I know, cool. That was quite funny. When I got there, I knew something was off. The deer was too still and smelled horrible. I couldn't see its face, and its back was facing me, but when I got up to it, I nearly had a heart attack when I saw its entire stomach is ripped open. I wasn't a smart kid, but I knew this was messed up. When I turned to run back home to tell my mum, I saw another deer nailed to a tree next to the first. I don't know how I didn't notice this before, but its 2 front hooves are literally nailed to it. It's a disgusting scene, as you can imagine. As I stood there, staring at it, a car drove past a little alley. I remember it's a white car with tinted windows driving really slowly. I mean, everyone drove slowly on this alley because it's a residential street, but these people were barely moving. I can't see inside, but I got the sinking feeling that they were watching me. Obviously, I can't be sure that they are, but I'm 99% sure it was them. Once they were gone, I booked it home and told my mum the whole thing. She told me not to go in the field again, and I agree. I really hated what I saw. For the next month or so, I saw that car drive everywhere. It would drive up and down the main road I was on while I was playing in the front yard. It would drive down and back towards the alley when I would be back in the yard. I even remembered seeing it at a grocery store once, but they were definitely staking the house out. It was always the white car, tinted windows, maybe they're following me, and always driving way too slowly to be normal. I tell my mum about it, but she chalks it up to a neighbour just going down the road. So one day, my mum was out mowing the lawn. Because of the way the apartment is, she had to push the lawnmower all the way around the apartments to get to our backyard. Being the helpful kid I was going to meet my mum out the back to open the gate so she can put the lawnmower in the shed. As I'm walking out the gate, I see the car come along the back alley. Normally, the car goes slow. As soon as it turns a corner, however, the driver steps on the gas, zooming up behind me. The back door closest to me opens and someone gets out and starts running towards me. I don't remember what he looked like or even if it was a he. I just remembered getting back home as quick as I can, terrified. After that, my dad yelled at me for peeing myself, and neither he nor my mum believed me about the guy in the car, and I never saw him again, and we moved a few months later. That sounds really harsh, Jesus. My parents still think I made up the whole thing, even though they thought how sketchy the neighbourhood was. I don't remember anyone going missing at that time in my town, but I never really looked it up. All I know is it was really messed up, and I have no idea who those people were and why they did that to the deer or what they planned for me. I just hope they never done anything to anyone else. This happened a few years ago, and we didn't know exactly who this man was, but it still scared me senselessly. When I was about 13, I used to have my bed right under my bedroom window. It was also around the time my dog was brought inside because she got too old to stay out. At the time, we didn't have screens covering the doors like we do now, or the windows, so the windows could easily be opened and there's no barrier. I always left my window open during the day to let in fresh air, then close and lock it when it starts getting dark. The house is surrounded by forest, not very thick, but still thick enough that you can't clearly see through it. It's completely normal to hear strange noises at night, because things like bears or stray dogs or even former neighbours' chickens would roam around through our backyard. So when I heard something shuffling around my window, I didn't think much of it, and continued playing video games. Not even 10 minutes later, I heard something hit against it. It may have just been a large June bug. When they hit a window, it sounds like rocks being thrown, so I literally ignore it. The knocking kept going, but I just kept ignoring it until finally it stopped. Fast forward until around 2 AM. I was finally settling down and going to sleep when I hear breathing. Very faint, enough to miss if my room wasn't silent. I heard something drag down my window, like a stick or finger. I did it a few times, and that was enough for me. I jump out of bed, running to my dad's room. I told him that there was something at my window, and he immediately came to look. We turned on the lights, and nothing's there. I told him what I heard, and he said he's gonna look in the morning. We did just that, and my stomach churned. Under my window, there were two completely different foot tracks, one back and forth besides the generator, looking directly under my window. There's even cigarette butts laying on the floor, and ashes. Like they've been there for a while. The foot tracks led towards the woods, and seemed to stop there. We have no idea who this was, and to this day even thinking of this terrifies me. Afterward we put locks on the windows and screens up, but I'll never forget that day. Okay, so this was a normal rainy evening when I was 14. I played games until my mum come in and told me to go to sleep. But before I get to the creepy parts, I'll give you an overview of our home. Our house is located on a hill. The closest neighbours are literally 100 meters further at the road. This road leads to nowhere, so there are rarely people going past our home. Behind the house is a little forest area that I used to play in as a child. And also, the house has 2 floors. My room is at the second upper floor. Yeah, I gotta admit it's a lonely house, with rain, darkness, and a forest that could keep me a little bit worried if I didn't know what was in there. So I went to sleep as usual at 11 PM. I fell asleep very quickly. However, at 3 AM I woke up, and I didn't do that so often. I think I had to go to the bathroom or something, so I went to pee and look through the window and do my thing. But it wasn't that relaxing nightly forest that I saw. My eyes glued on a specific character in the darkness. A man wearing dark clothes was just standing at the path of the forest. I don't know what he was doing. I started to panic, of course, and switched off the bathroom lights really quick. I sneak up to my parents downstairs, and I've never felt so afraid moving in my home in my life. We had alarms on, but it didn't calm me. I took a look at my parents. They're asleep. My sister's not up either. I went to the kitchen and peeked through the window. There he was, still standing at the pathway, closer now. And now I can see his body. I can't figure out his face. He looks huge. I just sat at the window, scared and almost falling to tears. Little rain poured to the ceiling and made naturally chill sounds. That didn't help. I peeked through the window again, and I almost jumped out of my skin when he's standing in the yard now. I can see his face. He looks terrifying. I now ran to my parents to wake them up. My father ran out the back door, but my mum said that he could be dangerous and might be armed. She calls the police. Movement inside the house made the guy move, and he runs towards the road and the forest. My father swore that he couldn't go after him, but was mad that he couldn't. Now we wait for the cops to show up. Eventually they show up and ask questions and check out the forest with my dad. At this point, I went to sleep again with my mum, terrified but managed to sleep. I still have nightmares about this today. When I was young, me and my brother loved to go and play and explore in the forest near where we lived. We had a group of neighbourhood friends that we'd also do this with, and to be honest, those were some of my best memories. However, this would all change one day, and everything seems like normal. We set off on a normal summer's evening, and we decide we're going to play hide and seek. Now to get to where we play, we have to walk through a bit of a swampland. I say swamp, it's not really a swamp, but it feels very similar to one. So we're walking through this, stumbling around, and finally make it to the giant tree. This is the exact tree that marks the spot where we play. So, I have to look for people unfortunately, but it's my turn, so that's fine. I hide behind this tree and start counting. I finally get to 1 and say I'm ready for you lot. And I burst out laughing when I see one of my stupid friends has literally climbed on top of the tree, hid directly above me, got caught instantly, then starts panicking that he can't get down. I help him down and I say, "You search the left side, I'm gonna go a bit deeper and find these." He says fine. To be honest, more than anything, I can't wait to tell the others how stupid he was. As I'm walking, I see something up ahead. It's a dark figure. I laugh and start sprinting up there. I stumble on the way and hurt my knee though, so I was quite annoyed about this. But by the time I get there, the figure's moved. Now I'm looking around and something feels very odd. It feels like I'm being watched, but not like in hide and seek. This is almost like a much darker, ominous presence is there. I've literally never had a feeling like it since then. So I look around when I see part of a hand. Well, it's not a hand, it's a stick that looks like a hand, but I can make out what it is in the shadows. As I get closer, I see it's holding something. I think that's really odd. I get a bit closer and realise that it's a skeleton hand. One that looks slightly degraded, like it's been there for some time. Halloween's around the corner, so I'm sure it's a Halloween prop. I hold up the piece of paper and look inside. It says run. It's not in any of my friends' handwriting. And then, to my horror, I see a shadow appear behind me. I glance back for a second, and there's 2 giants of men standing there in full camo gear, with smirks on their faces. I drop the paper and let out this blood-curdling scream, and I begin to sprint my way back. I end up going all the way to the tree, and to my horror, I'm met by all of my friends there, who can see how scared I am, and we all sprint all the way back home. When I get there, I explain what's happened, and my brother's so scared he starts crying, where he's younger than me. We're more scared of getting in trouble with our parents, don't even bother telling them, but looking back on it now, I really wish I'd done something more at the time, like told the authorities or something. I hate the thought that there's some twisted, mental people out there that would do something like this. God knows what their intentions were, but I can guarantee you that they weren't good. A little backstory first. I grew up in upstate New York, about 30 minutes north of Syracuse to be exact. It only made sense that I would return to my quiet little part of the world after I got out of the Marines in 2007. The only problem is that I didn't have much money. The good news is that my grandfather had an old pool behind camper that he told me I could have until I got on my own feet. So, being on my own, I decided I'd spend about a year in the pool behind on a few acres of woods that I bought from a friend of mine while I was in the Marines. Now all my taxes had been paid for the year, so the only thing I had to do was pay for gas and propane. I managed to avoid looking like a crazy mountain man by showering and washing my clothes at a local truck stop / diner, even getting a pretty decent job working security. I filled the rest of my time working odd jobs for extra cash. Alright, so for the main story. It was mid-April. I was sitting next to a nice low fire while listening to my battery-powered radio, watching nightfall in the woods. I had gotten a nice dinner at the diner down the road, so I didn't have any work for the next few days. Generally, I don't see anyone in the woods for weeks at a time, so I wasn't expecting it when I hear a scream to break the silence. I shot up, grab my shotgun, and get out of the camper and check the chamber to make sure it's loaded. I stood on the edge of a small clearing, strained my ears to listen for any sounds. It's generally hard to pinpoint sounds in the dead of night in the woods, but luckily I hear some shouting and car doors slamming, so I knew that the sounds had to be coming from the main vehicle trail a short distance from my campsite. I made my way to the trail as fast as I could in the low light, and before I get halfway there, I heard another clipped scream to my left. I could hear a rustling in the brush. I slowly made my way there, and to where I think the noise is coming from. I come out of the woods right next to a man who had a woman pinned to the ground, just standing over her. Shaking from adrenaline, I leveled the shotgun at the top of the guy, and the woman growled at him to get off. Now I'm a big guy, but I have no doubt that the shotgun was the deciding factor in this whole situation. Each of these guys easily had a solid 30 pounds of muscle on me when I was a 200-pound Marine. I ushered the two idiots back, so I was between them. The woman's now getting to her feet. It was about now I realised we have another problem. My cell phone was cheap and didn't get reception in the woods, and hers had been broken by these two sickos. There wasn't much I could do other than march these two back to their jeep under the threat of shotgun. I get the license number, and I'm sure it was fake, and a description of them and their vehicle. Before the driver gets in the vehicle, I lowered the shotgun to his crotch and made sure he understood what a 3-inch 12-gauge shell loaded would do. They took off in one direction. Me and the woman made our way back to my campsite. We drove to the DEC station and reported it as quick as possible. It turns out that the guy I had threatened was the young girl's now ex-boyfriend. They'd been out having a few drinks when the third wheel in the situation got a little too handsy for her liking. When she said something to her boyfriend, he basically told her to stop and get on with it for once. When she refused, the boyfriend smashed her phone and pushed her to the ground. They both pushed her into the truck and drove her deep into the woods. She had waited for them to become complacent before throwing the back door open and jumping out and taking off. Luckily, the Jeep was crap and the back door didn't lock. It was a stroke of luck that I happened to be outside when she escaped. Fast forward 7 months, and that woman I helped is now my wife, and we moved into our first house using the money I saved up living in the woods. We've been married for 8 years now, and I have 2 kids, a 6-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl. I still go out to camp every year to hunt and haven't seen the Jeep or the guys again. We heard through the grapevine that they had been arrested and actually got jail time. I'm assuming they moved to a different area because I never saw them again. I live in a suburban part of a small rural town in eastern Missouri, in a pretty quiet neighborhood. We've had one crime here in the past 3 years, and it was me who committed it. A jaywalker. Comprised mostly of elderly women and single mothers. We own 4 vehicles: my car, my mum's van, my stepdad's car, and my mum's old truck that's illegal to drive now. So I was home alone, about a week after my graduation, while my stepdad's at work. My mum was talking to my youngest brothers, and they had to go to the doctor's office, so they left. And my 2 middle brothers were at their friend's house, so I was lounging on the couch in my fuzzy robe and underwear playing Fallout. Good game. My stepdad is a professional chef and does 80% of our cooking at home. I have terrible anxiety and an addiction to investigation discovery. So whenever I'm home alone, I keep the longest, sharpest knife on myself or within an arm's reach at all time. It may have saved my life. Or something. This is confusing. There's a knock at the door, and it's not too suspicious. We frequently get solicitors and Mormons in the neighborhood, so I wasn't worried. Being a cautious person, I peek out through the curtains just a bit to see who it was. I'd seen this guy around the neighborhood before, walking around, and I don't feel threatened by him, since if it got physical, I had at least 5 inches on him and a knife. Anyway, I want to open the door, and I do so, figuring that at worst, I can politely turn him away, tell him I wasn't interested and go on with my life. At best, well, not gonna lie, he's cute in a generic way. So, I open the door, resting my hand on the back of the couch, where I've hidden the knife under a blanket, just in case. As soon as I opened the door, I knew there's something off. I've got a blunted effect due to a combination of depression, PTSD from abuse, and schizophrenic type personality disorder. So, I'm grown up, and I'm used to using fake facial expressions to fit in. I thought maybe he had similar problems because his face was not normal. He had a big friendly smile, right below a pair of absolutely dead eyes. "Hey beautiful, day out. Mind if I come in for a moment?" he said awkwardly. I kinda smile awkwardly and say, no, my mum don't like having strangers in." "Oh," his smile gets bigger. "What are you doing?" At this point, I'm starting to feel nervous. I shrug. Can't complain, I guess. "Are you here to sell something or tell me about God?" He shrugged back. "Oh, you know? Can I come in? Maybe talk to your mum?" I'll go get her. She's in the backyard." I moved to close the door and step back, not turning my back to the dude. Before I closed the doorway, he reached out and stops the door. His fake smile is gone. His face is dead. Not angry, just dead. "You're home alone. Your mum isn't in the backyard." I pause and swallow hard. Then I push the door again. "What do you want, man?" "To come in. Please let me in." I reach over, quickly sliding the knife from under my blanket and pointing it at him, saying, "I'm not gonna let you in. Leave." He looks down at the knife, back up at me, blinks rapidly, then affixated the smile to his face again, saying, "Oh, no problem. Goodbye." I watched him turn around and walk back down the street until he turned the corner. Then I locked and deadbolted every door and window in the house, got the dog out of my mum's bedroom, and resumed my gaming. I ended up calling my aunt's boyfriend, the only cop I trust, let him know what happened, stayed on the phone with him until my mum got home from the doctors. She called around town, found a couple of other people who'd seen him walking and driving around, but none of them knew who he was. So we were on high alert for about a week. It's been over a month now, and nobody in town's seen him. This old memory of mine, I've been talking about a lot because of the recent news of the Delefi murders. As the man I'm talking about looks similar to the first sketch, but this is 20 years ago and the sketch is now irrelevant. But anyway, when I was 12, I lived in Flagstaff, Arizona. If you're not familiar with this part of Arizona, it's not what you think of when you think of Arizona. It's a pondosaur, a pine forest with mountains, and it snows in the winter. Anyway, across the street from my home was an entrance to some woods with paths. As my parents worked, and I was the first one home after school, it was my responsibility to walk the dog. Usually, I would take him just inside the woods entrance so I wouldn't have to pick up his crap from under the rocks that would usually be in sight. Now, usually, I was too afraid to go into the actual woods, even with my dog, because he was stronger than me and didn't listen to me well when we were outside. The other reason I didn't like it is the wolves, packs of wild dogs, sometimes cattle, seriously, and of course, anything lurking. But this day, I felt adventurous, I guess, and took him over there. We went pretty deep that day, and I didn't see another soul because it's about 3 PM and the people are at work. None of the neighborhood kids really hang out there either. Now my dog was excited by anything that moved and always wanted to greet another person, cat or dog. But this day, on the way back, I remembered him being steadfast, still pulling, walking me along on the way back home, ignoring squirrels and trees blowing in the wind. Then, out of nowhere, a man appeared on the trail in front of me. Now when I say out of nowhere, that's exactly what I mean. The woods are not dense, and usually you can see people from a mile away, as long as they don't surprise you. The man was dressed head to toe in brown and tan colours and gave a weak "hey" and doesn't make eye contact. The way he dressed stuck out to me, as everything but the treetops was brown, as there's actually a drought going on at the time. Even the picture I linked is more greener than it was then. As he passed me, I took a few more steps and turned around because he made uneasy and steady pace behind me, but he was gone. I could see probably 50 feet of the trail behind me. There's no reason I shouldn't be able to see him still. My kid brain starts going, maybe it's a ghost. No, he must be hiding. There's no way I wouldn't be able to see him immediately after passing each other. Maybe he was hiding in front of me, before he came out of nowhere. Maybe that's why he's got all brown on, trying to blend in. The dog didn't want to greet him anyway. It didn't make sense. It didn't take long for my dog and I to take off running all the way home. Thank God I had my goofy dog on me, because he was pretty aloft, but also protective. For all I know, maybe the disappearing woodsman watched me take my dog out every day, saw me wander in that day. I know I let my dog crap in the yard a few weeks afterwards. The reason it was so weird is that he was pretty much in perfect camouflage, and he had no dog on him or reason to be out there. I'm not sure exactly who it was. It definitely wasn't a hunter either, because hunting's illegal, and that's what creeps me out. Why on earth would anyone be in camouflage in the woods where hunting's illegal? My boyfriend and I went backpacking in the mountains. I'd been camping before, but only camping in a car, so never had to carry a bag on me for a long period of time. So this is my first time actually backpacking. Now after getting lost trying to find a parking lot, the map swore there was, but there actually wasn't. We drove around the mountains, finally finding a parking lot we could stay at. We'd planned to walk down the mountain, camp, then walk back up the following day. About an hour in, it's maybe 6 PM, and we come across this guy sitting off the side of the trail, cooking in a cheap stove. He said to us if we know why we're there and where we're at, and saying can we point him in the direction of a certain place on the mountain. He says he's parked there. He continues talking about how he had a friend drop him off who was going to pick him up at point A, and then changes his story to that he's parked at point B, and then said another friend dropped him off and went to hike somewhere else, and that he needed a map or something to get to point C. Yeah, I'm confused, and I don't like his story. We finally bid the dude good luck, saying we can't help, and continue down the trail. Now the trail is poorly marked and doesn't correspond with the map we found online, so we're really confused when we come to a horse trail with no markings to tell us if we're on the right path still. We decide to go down the trail and see if we can find a place to camp for the night, and find our way out in the morning. Both sides of the trail are lined with barbed wire, preventing us from being able to camp there. Eventually, we run into a huge puddle in the middle of the trail. We decide to turn back and go back to the part of the trail before it turns into a horse trail. That way, we can camp there for the night, because it's really dark and we're tired. About 20 feet behind us, we see the man from earlier. He talks to us again, and through conversation, we learned he had heavy narcotics, including fentanyl, and another one I don't remember the name of. By this time, there's so many red flags, so we took off, deciding to go back to the car and just drive home now. We live 4 hours away, and we're about 6 miles from the car, so we take off up the trail as fast as we can go. I got severely dehydrated on the way and was struggling. I have lots of water, but it's very hot out, and we're practically running up the mountain now. Eventually, I start hallucinating, thinking I'm vomiting blood, which is red Gatorade, or there was blood coming from my shoes, which is sweat, and there may or may not have been a bear somewhere nearby, but I could have hallucinated it also. We ended up doing the full 6 miles up the mountain in only 2 hours. We reached a parking lot, and that's when I gave up. I decided to wait on a branch while my boyfriend got in the car. The parking lot was curved, so we're out of sight from each other, but he finally came back down to me with the car and helped me in. We found a gas station and slept for a little while before heading home. As we're driving out the park, we see a warning sign saying there may be an escaped convict in the area. This is a true story that happened to me. Back in the 80s, I was a camper at this place in the Adirondacks, a 6 million acre state park in upstate New York. All camps have their own customs, and I'm not sure if this occurred elsewhere, but If sitting around a campfire and smoke was blinding your face, we would utter the phrase, "I hate white rabbits," and I swear this worked. The smoke would immediately move towards another direction. And no, it wasn't the breathiness of speaking the words that made the smoke move. It was rumoured to be a voodoo chant though. So things are different in the 80s. Things we did back then might have gotten you kicked out of camp if you got caught, but to be honest with you, these days, you would probably catch a court case and get jail time. Like the time my counsellor locked me in his room with a 6-pack of Budweiser, tall boys, and told me I can't come out until I finished. But that's a separate story. This camp was right on a very large and pristine lake, and periodically, there would be hikes and canoe trips to some of the islands on the lake. You choose your adventure, basically. So we're on this canoe hike to a large, huge, massive island that's not too far from camp at all. We're all slackers, smokers and stoners on this hike. My kind of people. The island was so big, it had a pretty wide running trail that went around the perimeter of the island, wide enough to comfortably ride a 4-wheeler around. Were they allowed? Wider than I was tall at the time, wide. So I mentioned this is in the 80s, right? That first night, some of us campers were partying with the counsellors, beers were being drunk. Now at the time we're sitting around a fire, of course, and when the smoke blew into someone's face, they said the phrase, "I hate white rabbits," and the smoke moved. The next reciprocate of the smoke said the same words, and so on. And the smoke was being moved around fast from person to person. At the height of the frenzied chanting, the smoke almost looks like a vortex. The next morning, I opened my tent to see lying on the ground, spanning the width of the running trail, the biggest dead rabbit I've ever seen in my life. It was dead. It had eyes that were glazed over blue and white. I've really never seen anything like this before. I know it could have just been coincidence, but it was crazy. This happened a couple of years ago. I wanted to go to the local wildlife trail to walk in the woods. I'd gone several times to hike and jog. I normally went with my boyfriend at the time, but he was working and I wanted to go, so I decided to go by myself. I felt pretty comfortable going. I park at the far end of the parking lot in case anyone else appears. The trail continues straight from the parking lot for about a mile until it curves up a large hill. Where I wanted to go was the abandoned parking lot with a lake. The turn off to this part of the trail was about 400 yards down to the left. Once you turn left, you have about 200 yards of flat trail before it inclines. This inclined section is loose gravel and it's quite noisy when you walk up it. The last section is about 100 yards. I felt pretty at ease going along the straight trail before I turned left. When I hit the incline, I began to feel uneasy. I brushed it off as being overly paranoid and continued. As I went about halfway up the incline, I began to hear crunching and snapping of twigs in the woods to my right. It sounded about 100 yards off. It was just far enough into the woods that I couldn't see what's making the noise. I froze in my tracks and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I stood still as I heard the crunching stop. Stupidly, I brushed it off as a deer or bobcat. I continue up the path until I hit the end of the incline. That's when I heard this thing in the woods beginning to run at me. I froze in fear, my heart beating 1,000,000 miles an hour. Every hair on my body stood up. I was rooted in place. That's when I saw him. A man was running straight for me while holding something in his hand. I began to run down the incline back to the main trail. I was slipping and sliding down the gravel. I looked behind me and noticed how that he's at the top of the incline already. He had this evil look in his eyes. I noticed the item in his hands was a knife. I almost slipped up due to me looking back at the man. He called out to me, "Get back here now." His tone was malicious. I sprinted as fast as I could and took a hard right back onto the main path. When I hit the parking lot, I didn't look back. I unlocked my car and started as quick as I can. Right as I was backing up, he emerges from the trail entrance. He just stands there, partially covered in the shade of the trees. As I tear through the parking lot and onto the highway, he just stares at me. The biggest, creepiest smile comes across his face as he slowly waves at me as I get onto the highway. I never went back to that trail. This encounter has scarred me for the rest of my life. I hate walking through the woods now. Okay, so I have no idea exactly what I saw that night. I have searched everywhere for sightings or even myths around that area we saw it and found nothing. If anyone has any idea of what we saw, please let me know. My husband and I think it could have well been a Wendigo, but I don't know. I haven't heard anyone else say they've seen anything like it. I guess more than anything I want to know what I saw and have some closure. So anyway, my friends and I go camping a lot, and my favourite place is the Red River Gorge, Kentucky. We go there often. I've been going there since I was an infant. I'm 28 now, married with a kid and still go. It's the coolest place to go where I live, and you can actually see the Milky Way pretty much every night. I mean, it's perfect for stargazing, and I've seen a shooting star every clear night that I've been there. When we go there without our kid, we might have a hike and stargaze for hours. Our first experience happened when we were night hiking, and we would go on trails we knew well, and we used frequently during the day. Ones with log fences and gazebo resting places. The most used trail is in the National Bridge State Park that leads up to the Natural Bridge. The trail is around 2 miles uphill depending on where you're starting. Now I've done this trail every summer of my life and could do it blindfolded. It has wooden steps, carved rock steps, log handrails, multiple sitting points under a roof, trash cans, but after reaching the main trailhead there's no lights at all. It's used often, and while it's uphill and the difficulty is low, as long as you have a good grip on your shoes and water, you'll be fine. My friends have done it with me multiple times and we're confident as hell at it. Hiking this trail at night is not allowed, but the woods have never really been a problem for me and no one really cared about the closure times. When we use this main trail to hike to the top, we would park in a lot designated for the Pull and Hoedown Island. You walk across the road that leads to the pool, and you're at the first trail marker. You go up the gravel for a while and pass the Natural Bridge State Park Lodge. There's a waterfall and some lights, so it was best to go fast and watch out for rangers that would tell us to leave. Then walk across another road and there's a mini shelter to sit on or a small rock where you can rest your legs. Then it's the beginning of the top of the trail. The night was weird to begin with. As soon as we started the hike, the clouds took over and it appeared we'd be walking for nothing even to stargaze at. But we went anyway, just in case it cleared out by the time we get there. In the beginning, it was normal, and paranoia was kinda setting in, but eased up a little. You know you've reached the bottom of the bridge when you see a giant limestone wall. Now during this time, there was a gazebo that sat to the right of this wall, and the trail continued and followed next to the wall. When you come far, there's a fairly steep part of the trail and the gazebo is welcomed. Now my husband, my best friend at the time, and I all sit on the gazebo steps. The bench is under a roof, and even darker than the rest of the outside, so we just stayed on the steps, facing to where we're looking downhill at the trail that follows the limestone wall. We each have a bright LED headlamp and a handheld flashlight. We don't usually look at each other when we night hike because the lights are so bright. We sit in a line like the Lord's Supper and walk in a line staggered so we don't blind each other. It's after hours at this point, so no ski lift rides had gone on for hours, and the rangers had already done the sweep and left before we could get there. We left no time between them making sure the trail and the top were clear and start our hike. The ski lifts takes you to the top, but there are workers that stay and do counts and only leave after it's clear. I guess I have to make these points because that's what I was thinking when what seemed out of nowhere, a girl with a headlamp begins to walk down the trail. This is kind of odd really. She's in a sundress and flip-flops. This hike is uphill, and while it's fairly easy to hike up, it's not easy to do without real shoes or water. She'd have to have hiked up and down to get to this point without food or water, which is a massive challenge. Her light seemed almost blinding too. When she reached where the trail turns from in front of the gazebo to down where we came from, she stopped. She just stood there, how a human is presented in an anatomical drawing. She was looking directly at us all, sitting there, and her light made me bring my head up. It was so bright that I literally had to shield my eyes. She didn't turn away from our light at all, or even seem bothered. She had 6 LEDs shining directly at her face. I say hello. She said, kind of with a pause between every word, something like, hello, how are you? I said something like good, how are you? And she took an even longer pause before saying, oh, I'm fine. And she just stood there with her hands to her side, facing down, staring at us. Her light made it impossible to really see her face. It was unnaturally bright. I had my hand up the entire time to not be blinded still, until she turned and slowly walked down the trail part we just came up. She got to the part where the trail turned, and we saw her light just stay in that one spot for a minute, until she turned and the light faded out of sight. We wait for a while before continuing up. I kept making comments about how weird that was, and had anybody else just seen this? And was I being overly paranoid with my fear? And why did no one come after her? Why had she done this all alone at night? And somehow without being found by any ranger. We got up after a bit and started back up to the top. It felt like it took much longer than it ever had in the past, but we made it to the top. There's stone steps named Fat Man Squeeze that you get to at the top of the bridge, and you can walk across it and whatever. Going up and being on the top, we can hear twigs snapping, almost alternating from left to right. We lay down and stargaze, but the clouds are thicker now. It was miserably hot, and we can hear voices at the same time. My husband kept checking for people. He never saw anyone. We see a flashlight, but we never see anyone attached to it. And then we hear a bird call. It wasn't like a real bird noise at all. It was like someone making bird calls, rhythmic and not natural. I'm convinced now that we're not alone, and hadn't been alone at all during this. And to say this is a lot because I'm not easily spooked. I asked to leave as soon as they're done. They then tell me that they're ready to go right then and there, and that scared me. It showed that I wasn't imagining all of this and they're just as scared as I am. We began going down the way we came from, and it felt like it was taking so long. We were going steady and quick, and it was downhill, but we were not making any ground, it seems. It's hard to explain, but it was so weird to the point that I said aloud, "This feels much longer than it should be," and everyone agrees with me. I keep looking behind me with the flashlight, and my husband kept looking out to the sides. I kept feeling watched and couldn't figure out where the footsteps were coming from. It sounded as though they're coming from all directions. I would turn my head in the direction of a sound and not see anything. When my husband was walking, he kept saying he was catching eyes in the flashlight. Usually you catch a raccoon's eyes spying on you. But he was afraid maybe it's a bigger animal like a bear or something. And even weirder is that he never seemed to catch contact with it truly when his flashlight went over it. Now by now, we're hiking down a semi-flattish area compared to the downhill hike we've been doing at least. The log fence or handrail or whatever it's called is on our right side. Now, we're walking in a row within reaching distance of this barrier, and my husband just stops walking altogether and says, "What's that?" But the question is more of an alert than a question. I move my headlamp in that direction and don't see anything at first. Then, both of his lights catch a shape, and then my headlamp also does the same. I move my headlamp to the center and catch it while my friend simultaneously finds it in her lights as well. All six shine on a kind of reflective grey creature. It's bent in a crouching position, kneeling on its front leg, and it starts turning towards us. It starts to turn slowly, and my mind is racing. It looks like a human, but it's too big. People mistake human shapes for what's actually bears, but this is skinny. It's thin and big, and almost white. It's so light grey. Its skin resembles that of a dolphin. There's a shine to it, and our lights get reflected a little way when they're on it. It gradually comes to a standing position in front of us. Its head is long, and its eyes are in a human position on its face, not on the side like most animals. We can't see other facial features, just big, almost empty holes or pits where its eyes are. It looks directly at us in our lights. The way it stood is almost intimidating, almost like when a snake raises up and flexes their necks in a wild fashion to show how strong and smart they are. It was like it was stepping up for a fight, from crouching, then standing directly in front of us. The arms hung down so low, the hands seemed way too long. Its hands had to be by its knees easily. I guess it stood 9 feet or so, and not that far in front of us. No, it has no hair at all, and its head is large. I couldn't process what I was seeing. I was truly frozen. Then, I just feel my husband hitting me, yelling "run." I start to understand we have to get away from this thing, and it pivots and runs to the right, going backwards on the trail so it could get around the barrier and onto the trail behind us. We take off running the rest of the way down the trail, knowing that this thing just took off much faster than us, and after it had crossed from behind the barrier, it would be gaining on us quick. We didn't talk at all because we tried to figure out what was going on and knew it wasn't good to draw attention to us. We kept running as fast as we could, but some areas are steep. It literally never feels as though we're out of sight from this creature. And we made it to the trail beginning with the gravel, and we can hear something to the side crashing down through the forest. We ran until we got to the car, then drove as fast as we could, and as soon as we got to the main road, we're finally out of there. When that thing looked at us, I knew it was smarter and faster than us. I knew that if we didn't react, something terrible would have happened. We made it back to where we were all staying, and all of us took out our phones and wrote a note of what we saw. We haven't spoke about it until after, and we all looked at each other's phones and the stories are all exactly the same. When I was 12, me and a group of my friends would play hide and seek in those woods where we're on the edge of our neighbourhood. We would always play at around 6, but had to be home by 10:30 at the latest on a weekend, and we weren't allowed to go so far that we couldn't see our houses. Those are the only rules our parents had for us. Well, one Friday, we're out playing in the woods as usual, and I, for whatever reason, decide to go in the woods deeper. I can't remember how far I went into those woods, but I do remember coming across an old shack. I considered using it as a hide-in place, but then I thought that they wouldn't come this deep into the woods to look for me, so I decided to head back. However, when I start to head back, I turn my head to look at the same shack one last time, and for a split second, I see someone peeking around the door. Whoever it was quickly turns their head back when they saw me, and I don't pay much attention to it and head back. I'm about halfway through my walk when I hear, "Hey kid, come over here." I look back and see an old man hiding behind a tree, gesturing for me to come. I know better, and took off running. While I was running, I heard him yelling, "Wait now, come back," and I could also hear the sounds of other footsteps accompanying him after me. When I got to the end of the woods, I ran into my friend's house, who was wondering where I was. I told them to get out of the woods, and we ran to our friend's house. I told them what happened, and eventually, I told my mum what happened too. Our parents called the police to search for the woods, but they never found anything, and our parents never let us play out again after that. Old man living in the shack, you could still be out there. I just hope you get caught and haven't done anything worse. My old man was an avid outdoorsman in the Colorado Rockies in the late 80s. He'd go on week-long treks with his buds. One summer, they'd been out for a few days in the Pikes National Forest. They set up camp in a ravine they thought was safe. That night, my dad unzipped the tent to take a leak in the dark, and outside stood a pair of bare pale feet. My dad screamed and zipped up the tent. Everyone else woke up and said, "What's wrong?" My dad said someone was barefoot out there, and they went out and flashed their flashlights for a bit, hollering. My dad swore that he saw the feet and described them in perfect detail. They were old blotchy feet, even having a lump on the ankle. Tony, his bud, asked what foot, left or right, and my dad said it was the right. Then Tony said they needed to move their camp immediately. My dad says why. Tony says he doesn't have time to explain. They all go along with it and pack up and move up to the hill. The next morning they woke up to find a flash flood had torn through the ravine that night. It would have surely killed them. Tony's grandfather had just died a month prior, and one of the last things he said to him was that he would always watch over him. The feet described reminded Tony of his grandfather's very feet. My dad is highly religious too. Supernatural or not, it's terrifying what happened to them. So this happened to me when I was about 7, and I lived in Portland with my grandparents. Now my grandma and I would always watch Lost together every night, and then the news would always come on afterwards. When we saw there was a sniper that was going around our area, in the woods somewhere, and they were looking for him, and lost his location. It blew our minds. I remembered one day at school, the whole school had to go on lockdown because someone reported seeing him near the school, and so everyone had to go to the hall and wait out the entire situation to clear. I don't think we left school until 7 PM. The police caught him and took him in for questioning. Later on, we found out through the news that he was hiding out in these small woods that are behind our house, literally meters away. Now my grandma and I would go for bike rides and walks most evenings. The only reason we hadn't was because of the shooter. I refused to leave the house for a good week or so because I was scared that he'd still be out there, and I wouldn't let my grandparents leave either because I was so scared something bad would happen to them. To this day, I still have a mini panic attack every time I go near them woods. Just the thought that at some point in time, only meters away, there was a killer waiting in the woods in camouflage terrifies me. It was the end of my freshman year of college, so my friend and I spent a weekend at my family's cabin by ourselves to celebrate. The weekend was fairly uneventful. The most exciting things to happen were burning a pizza on a grill and a chipmunk trying to join me while I was in the outhouse, which was pretty funny. But then, we had to leave. Even though I'd gone to the cabin every summer since I was born, I still didn't know very well how to get from it. We had been using my friend's dad's GPS. It was pretty old and probably hadn't been updated in a while, which is likely why it took us where it did. The route we took was fairly unfamiliar to me, but what do I know? It's a GPS. I trusted it enough to bring us wherever we needed to go. It ended up taking us down a twisted side road that I knew was wrong, but I kept going, thinking that maybe going through the woods would be faster. That's when it told me to take a left. I obeyed, but was extremely confused because it looks to be a dirt road. I slowed down to look at the GPS when my friend lets out a horrid, "Oh my god." I look up and realise we're not on the road at all. We're on someone's driveway. Then I saw the dolls. They were worn by the weather, full of dirt and faded from the sun. The ones I took note of were clowns, and bodiless and beheaded. There were so many, I can't even make out how many there actually are. Every single one's hanging from a tree. My friend and I were both shrieking at this point. Her yelling at me to back up and get out of there, me yelling what the hell over and over again. We safely got back to the main road and followed that until the GPS gave us a different route, which took us home without incident. Although I didn't see the person living in that rundown house, it was one of the most terrifying things that ever happened to me. It didn't even feel real when it was happening. It felt like I'd been dropped into the middle of a horror movie about a serial killer with some doll fetish or something. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if the person who lived there actually saw me pulling up. But I try not to let my imagination get the best of me. I hate to think of whoever's responsible for that house, if they still lived there. This happened a few years ago with my friend June, when we're maybe 17 or 18. I'm 23 now. We were out driving around late at night on country back roads. We were teenagers growing up in a rural area, so going for a drive was one of the main pastimes. We were both into goth stuff and witchcraft at the time, so we pulled off to the side of the road to walk around a small graveyard in the woods. It was impossible to see at night, but we'd gone there a few times in the day before, just to hang out. The whole area is heavily forested, but the path to the graveyard is short. It's right next to the road, just barely hidden in the woods. So we started slowly walking on the small loop that takes you around all the gravestones. We're using our flashlights at the time. We're looking at all of the names on the stones. I was very comfortable being by graveyards at night. I'm very relaxed, honestly. We mused about ghosts and deaths and whatnot, as goth teenagers do. About halfway around the loop, at the furthest point from the car, June got my attention as she notices a light in the woods. It looked far away, like it could have been a car on the road, so we turned away and kept walking. However, about 30 seconds later, she got my attention again. The light was much closer, and obviously moving quickly towards us. And then, I heard the sound of somebody crashing through the woods. It's blatantly obvious now that somebody's coming towards us. They're making a beeline, they backtrack, and so do we run into the car. I unlock it and climbed into the car as fast as I can, and right before the light come on, this huge grisly looking man, dressed from head to toe in camouflage, comes busting out of the foliage and coming right for the car. He's armed with a crossbow and literally sprinting at us, screaming. He's clearly off his head. I reverse as quickly as I could and peel out of there. We don't stop driving for a while, even though we both never saw him following after us when we drive off. We both can't shake the feeling that we're being followed. Finally, I think we both got too tired to stay out any longer, and we went back to our home. I really can't stop thinking about just how quickly he actually got to us. The fact that we're pretty much in the middle of nowhere, and this person is waiting in the woods in full hunting gear with a crossbow, and we're clearly not animals. As we had a flashlight, there's no trespassing signs anywhere. The whole area is around a graveyard. It's obvious that we're not meant to be there, but he definitely wasn't hunting. I got out into the woods and into weird places in the night a lot, and I've seen some weird stuff I would consider supernatural, but this is the one thing that really scared the life out of me. None of these things ever made me afraid to go into the woods like he did. I had my best friend. We'd always go for walks in the forest together. My friend wasn't very well at the time. He had an autoimmune illness, so I had to stay far away from him when we were talking and walking. This was great because it meant that he was unlikely to catch any illness that I potentially had, but kind of scary if you're going through the woods close to night. It didn't matter though. We're both young men who are fairly big, so we didn't really care too much. Call it blind luck that we never ran into anyone until this event, but I was very confident going into the woods. Now we start talking about life and we're just having a good time generally when we decide to sit on some logs and continue our conversation. My buddy turns off his headlamp for a bit to try and save some energy, and I do the same because last time my headlamp went off and it is only because of his that we're able to get out again. As we do so, we suddenly hear steps around us. Neither of us actually reacted at first because we both assumed that one another were moving. It's only a few moments later when our eyes can adjust in the darkness that we realise it's not one another. Now, we both give each other a blank stare when we realise this. It sounds like there's loads of people running in circles around us, but there's literally no one. Like that, we both flick on our headlights, and just as mine comes on, I catch the glimmer of a very tall shadowy figure by a tree. That's enough time for me to let out a scream, and my buddy sees the exact same thing I do. The craziest part is that you can't see through this thing. The light shines directly on it and there's nothing behind it, and it's slowly coming towards us. We both pick up our bottles and start sprinting as quick as we possibly can back to my friend's car. We both feel like we're about to have a heart attack, but we're safe now. We're both trying to say what the hell was that thing we just saw. And as we do so, we can hear them footsteps again. This time, sounding like they're closer than before. We both got straight into his car and sped out of there like there was no tomorrow. To this day, we've never seen anything like it. I mean, we never went back to them woods again for a start, but I can't find that many people that have had similar experiences to us. All I know is that it scared the life out of me, and I'm glad I was not alone when this happened. There's an abandoned house next to mine. The previous owner moved to California 25 years prior and never sold it. I got a flashlight, gloves, and pushed the window open to go inside, starting in the basement. In the basement there was a grand piano. It still plays, but very much out of tune. There's some old World War II stuff, what seems to be a signed Elvis poster, and other really cool stuff in there nobody should leave. There's basically a whole story in the basement, including a broken wedding picture frame and instruments everywhere. On the main floor was an unmade bed, moulded food in the fridge, half-empty beers and whatnot. The light's actually still on, never been turned off. Then I walked upstairs when I heard crying from one of the side rooms. I know for a fact there's literally nobody in there. That's when I freaked out and have never been back since. I lived in a house that had a really nice annex, or smaller house in the backyard. My grandparents usually lived there, but they had unfortunately passed away in recent years. Now one day I was home alone when I realised somebody's left the light on in there. I'm a bit annoyed because I don't want to go out in the cold and snow, also it's wasting electricity. So I get my coat on and head out. It's about a 500-meter walk, so it's quite a long way down there. I don't mind though. I feel a little bit relaxed, and to be honest it was quite pleasant in the snow. I can see footsteps that lead up to the back of the house, so I think that my brother's probably gone down there. Now I step inside and realise that it's extremely cold. I know it's snowing, but it shouldn't be like this. I turn around to find where the light switch is, and the moment I raise my hand up, the light goes off on its own. I think this is a little odd, and I hear laughter coming. I realise that my youngest brother's playing a trick on me, and I say, "Ha, that's really funny. Enjoy being in the cold," and I go to leave. As I step outside, I realise that something's off. I can see a figure from my house, and I realise who it is. My oldest brother. Seconds later, my youngest brother appears too. I bolt out of there immediately, getting inside. I can barely get words out to say what happened. Neither of my brothers actually believe me, and it annoys me so much. They actually went out with me to investigate, and we couldn't find anyone in there. They think it was just me messing around or my mind playing tricks on me, but I know what happened to this day, and I've never been back in there since. My oldest brother, who unfortunately passed away, was almost a human killing machine. He could spot game other people couldn't see. Now one day, I was out hunting with him and he used my shoulder as a rest to kill a crow. I couldn't see this thing until it exploded. Now one day, we were out fox hunting. Foxes are very intelligent, and in the winter, sometimes you come across them sleeping on top of hills because the sunlight keeps them warm. So we're walking along and my brother stops and says, "Stop down," in a whisper. About 300 yards away is a fox curled up on a hill, so he lies down and prepares to take the shot. Just as he flipped the safety off, a second before pulling the trigger, the fox basically does a 180 on the snow, still as a ball. Turned out that the fox was actually a hat. Some idiot was wearing a fox hat and decided to drive on a snowmobile on someone else's property where we hunt. He was so lucky that my brother didn't take the shot. I I was sitting in my room after getting out of work on the second floor. My little bro is downstairs watching TV. The dog is in the hallway outside my door sleeping. All of a sudden, the dog starts making all kinds of racket, jumping around, barking, clanking nails, howling. I get up to see what's going on and I hear, "Oh, that's a good girl," in a mild voice. It didn't sound like my little brother, so I say, "Oh, you're home early," thinking it was my dad's friend or our roomie as I open the door. As soon as I'm there, there's no one at all but the dog waggling her tail, staring at an empty end of the hallway. My little bro comes upstairs to yell at me for getting his dog riled up, said he heard the same voice thinking it's our roommate. We did a once over at the house with my butterfly knife and his BB gun. Nobody was there whatsoever. I was about 7 years old. My brother was about 10. It was well past our bedtime when our mum woke up off the couch to put us to bed. Our dad worked from a construction area out of town, so it was usually just a couple of us at home. I mean the three of us. Up the stairs and to the immediate right was our parents' bedroom. Going left, it will put you in the middle of a hallway. Taking another left down that hallway led to my brother's room. The opposite end, which is my room, is across the hallway from our upstairs bathroom. At either end of the hallway are windowed doors which we always keep locked and rarely ever use. The door on my left actually led to the balcony overlooking our front yard, and the door on my brother's end opened up to the back porch. Now my mum and brother actually both have a habit of waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I only ever become aware of this due to the fact that I was such a light sleeper, and they just couldn't help flushing with the door open. This night, however, my brother stopped on his way to his room and came back towards the bathroom. I'm gonna try and pee before I go to bed. The past few nights I've been too afraid to walk to the bathroom alone. I keep seeing a man wearing stripes at the end of the hallway. I don't know if my mum wrote it off as my brother telling ghost stories trying to scare me, or if she was already half asleep and didn't catch it, but she didn't react at all to my brother's confusion. I, on the other hand, am absolutely terrified by this. The fear of seeing a ghost-like figure at the end of the hallway through the window absolutely terrifies me. Now, years later, when I was about 18, my mum and I were having a conversation in her car about a dog that we had for a very short amount of time. We were sharing stories about Max's tendency towards destroying my shoes and other unruly behaviours when my mum blurred out, "Do you remember that time I opened the front door for the cops and Max ran inside to the kitchen and started tearing open that big bag of dog food we had?" This really caught me by surprise because in all the years I lived in that house, we never once called the cops. Gun-owning family in a quiet rural neighbourhood, etc. I said to her, "What is she talking about?" and she looked equally surprised, as if she just revealed something by accident. "Oh, that's right. I never told you because you were too young at the time. One night I woke up hearing noises outside my window, and when I looked outside, I saw a man staring into my bedroom." She went on to describe how turning on the lights caused him to take off running, and how she actually had to run and grab my dad's pistol before calling the police. I can't remember at all. I mean, I gave them details when they showed up. It's a tall white male, wearing a striped shirt and jeans and short dark hair, something like that. They said it matched the description of a man they were looking for in the area. It turns out that he had escaped from jail for murder. Now, it sounds so obvious hearing those two things together, but it wasn't until a few years ago, in my mid-20s, that I pieced together what my brother had unknowingly warned us about: a murderer who spent multiple nights staying in our home trying to avoid the police. I moved to my dad's when I was 10 and didn't know anyone in the area, except for the family my dad was friends with, a single mum with 3 kids. Luckily there was a girl a couple of years older than me, 12 at the time I met her, and we get to know each other. We weren't close but ended up having the same friends. One night my friend Rob was hanging out with her and her younger brother. They happened to be in the house alone because of my friend's mum being at work, which is where this gets terrifying and sad. Her mother had been helping this one lady through her work and got to know her fairly well. She found out that her sister was in a mental institution recently and was let out. The night Rob is hanging out with my friend, they get a knock on the door. They don't really think much of it, thinking it's just their mum, and answered it without thinking. Rob wasn't supposed to be there and he took off through the window down the road to his house. He never thought about it really, but it wasn't her mum. It was the sister of the lady her mum was helping, and she figured out from talking on later where her family lived and her mum's working schedule. She came in, and this is where I don't know the details, and I'm glad I don't. My friend's younger brother got away to the neighbours to call the police. The lady had brutally murdered my friend a week before Christmas, hid her body, and they had to look through the presents, and I don't know where they found it, but they did. I wasn't even allowed to go to the funeral. A few years ago, I was home alone at night. I was watching TV in the living room when I heard the doorbell ring. Whenever I heard the door ring, especially when I'm home alone, I'm cautious to answer it. I walk up to the peephole without turning on the porch light, so they don't know if I'm actually in or not, which is smart, and look through. It's really dark, but I see a small figure move like a black blob. It's a definite shape, and it had to be around 3 or 4 feet tall, doing a circle dance, dipping down and oscillating its arms forward. Think of a person moving their arms like wings gracefully. It's dark outside, but this figure was more opaque, so I could see what's going on. After a few seconds, I stopped looking through the peephole because I'm so scared. I regained some courage and looked through again, but this thing is gone. To this day, I don't know what that is, and I still get freaked out by it. First off, I want to apologise because English isn't my native language, so sorry if my writing style seems a bit odd. So when I was in high school, I was not a very hard-working student, but I wasn't a troublemaker. I was just an incredibly lazy girl, working the minimum so that my parents wouldn't get angry at me. I always had some kind of easiness regarding schoolwork, and never knew what it truly meant to make effort. So I spent all my classes drawing onto my copybooks without making any true effort for real notes. Now, during my junior year, my maths teacher, who was seen by everybody as a very uptight but caring individual, was particularly upset about this. As many of my other teachers were, he wanted me to work harder. I mean, I wasn't bad at maths. I would usually achieve around 13 or 14 out of 20. Now I'm French, but I assume this is like a B- or something. But sometimes my grades are really low. During a teacher-parents meeting, he told my mum that I was wasting my capabilities, that it was infuriating how much I was lazy. My mum replied that she agreed and that he shouldn't blame himself but should try and push me harder and it'll be worth it. And he did exactly what she told. In every maths class, he would always question me first before anybody else, was always sitting right next to me, and during the test he would always tell me, "You can do it, you can do it." It made me feel incredibly uncomfortable because at this age, nobody wants the attention of the whole class on them. My class started realising that my maths teacher was a little obsessed with me and were teasing me about this. The last class before Christmas break, the maths teacher threw a little surprise party for Christmas. It was very nice and he gave us chocolates and mock champagne and we had a lot of fun. During the party, he pours me another glass of mock champagne, telling me that I deserve it because I was doing better. It was true. I was now getting about a 15 or 16, which is like having an A or so. I accept it, but didn't really drink too much. I have diabetes and already had far too much chocolate. But during the next class, I was feeling bad. I almost fainted and finished my last day of school before Christmas in the nurse's office. At that time, I wouldn't have even thought about it because of the alcohol-free champagne. I thought it was due to my diabetes that I ate too much chocolate. A few weeks later, my class threw some kind of charity event. It was a class project and we were very proud. In my country we don't have proms, so it was an occasion to wear pretty formal clothes and dance together. The maths teacher was invited and he was helping some of the boys tend to the bar. He served me an alcohol-free cocktail, but before I drank it, a classmate of mine, Flora, poured some vodka in, even though it was forbidden to bring alcohol into the event. I was mad because with my diabetes I couldn't drink alcohol, so I told her that I can't have it and just threw the cocktail. At the same time I thought about it. She didn't really worry about me and I didn't like it. Now the event ended pretty badly because of the alcohol Flora brought us. Some of the guys were very drunk and started breaking things. Flora passed out because of all the alcohol she had. This ended the event. Flora had been admitted to hospital because of her coma was pretty severe, and we spent the next few days being lectured regarding the dangers of alcohol. Not a good time really. Flora got expelled from school and never went again. I was very upset with her because every event would now be completely different because of this. So I kind of ghosted her and never asked if she was doing better or anything. Now I feel bad about this, but at the time I was immature and young. But because of that, I will never know if she was ill because of the alcohol poisoning or because of my cocktail. A few weeks later, I failed a maths test. It had been a long time since I failed a maths test and the teacher was angry. He yelled at me in front of everyone saying how much of a disappointment I was, and that I would end up living in a cardboard box under a bridge. Something's off. I was feeling unwell. He had a very weird look in his eyes and it gives me chills and I can't help but cry. He calmed down a bit and said he would just give me an hour of detention, during which I will get the joy of copying everything from the lesson. I was a little surprised because normally detention is for bad behaviour, not for bad grades, but I was a little relieved because it was a small punishment. My parents would never know. Indeed, I lived kind of far from my high school and there were only one or so buses every so often. Because of that, even if I finished at 4, I would never get home before 5, and if I've had a detention between 4 or 5, my parents won't know. But then, when he officially gave me the detention hour, he said that he wanted to be personally present during this and that the only possibility was for it to be between 5 and 6. I was nervous because now my parents are gonna know. As I said earlier, I wasn't a troublemaker, so at first I planned to go to detention hour, but during the day my friends and I talked about it a lot. I was feeling more rebellious, so I decided not to tell my parents that I was in detention and that one of my friends would pick me up at 6 and drive me home. At 5 PM, when heading towards the detention room, I was angry, mumbling that it's not fair for me to have a detention because of one thing, one bad grade. When I arrived in the detention room, I was the only one waiting. I realised then that I would be the only student in detention, alone with that maths teacher who was a little obsessive, and it was getting dark outside. It's a big no for me when I saw him come in. I panicked. I said, "I'm sorry, I have an emergency, and now I'll email the school for rescheduling the detention," and I ran. He started to yell at me that I had to obey him, and then he would call my parents, but I don't care. I sprint towards the bus to catch my bus. I was afraid that he would have to call my parents, so when I arrived, I was shaken. But my parents greet me normally. He didn't call them. He never came back the next day, actually over weeks. Eventually, I learned that he quitted his position. A shrink came during an hour to ask us if we wanted to talk about the maths teacher, but as nobody knew him that well or what was going on with him, we didn't have much to say. Until a few months later, that was until a few months ago, I become a teacher. How ironic given my laziness as a teenager. And one day while talking with my co-worker, I mentioned his name, talking about his weird bizarre behaviours that just didn't seem right, and one of my oldest co-workers went very pale hearing his name. In fact, a few days after the detention incident occurred, my maths teacher was arrested for having very bad videos downloaded onto his laptop from the dark web, and weird movies starring very young children. Maybe this detention hour was just a detention hour and I would have got out normally, but I will never know, and always wonder what would have happened if I had stayed. I'm someone who loves to go exploring. Where better than abandoned buildings? Well, I can tell you, abandoned buildings in the forest. Now, my friends would usually accompany me on my exploration trips, but there was a few times that I would just go out on my own. One, because my friends couldn't come, and two, I would get really bored living in the woods sometimes. Now, my dad was a logger, so he would always be out, and my mum taught at a school, so she would have quite long days too. One night in particular, the stars aligned for me to go on one of my adventures alone. All I had with me was a Sony Walkman, which is actually something I loved, and I still think they're incredible to this day. So at the time this was very good, but in hindsight, it's pretty stupid because it meant literally anyone could come up to me and do whatever and I wouldn't know it. I can't say I listened to audio at a good volume too, so... well, I can't hear now, but that's besides the point. So I set out on this one day. I decided to leave my dog at home because as much as I love him, it's a liability to get lost, and in the woods where I live, if your animal goes missing, they'll probably get hunted and eaten by predators, or you just never find them again. I say goodbye to my dog and I feel bad as he sat there watching me through the glass window of the door, but I'm not that bothered. I'll be back in no time, or at least that's what I tell him. So I close the door and off I set. Now this is actually a really nice night. It's a little bit cold and it's going to be dark in a couple of hours, but I'm really happy to be outside and I really find some peace in doing this. I head off in the direction that I always go, directly in front of my parents' house. After going past a small road, there's the woods straight in front of you. Now for some people that might be a terrifying concept, just being faced with darkness directly in front of you, but I actually really enjoyed it. So I walk into the shadowy woods. As I do so, I'm actually having a really good time. Now, there are some abandoned houses and loggers' cabins further up that I'd like to go and find. There's some which are further out that me and my friends have never explored, and I think, hey, why not? My parents won't be home for a while, and I've still got some work to do from school that I really can't be bothered with. So I go further than I normally do. Now luckily for me, I've been in these woods for such a long time that it's pretty hard for me to get lost. So I make my way to the first waypoint, one of the houses we like to go in. I walk in there and, to be honest, I don't really feel so good. Doing this without my friends isn't really the same, and we're not really joking or trying to make each other jump, so I'm not that excited. I realise I prefer doing things with people and I'm actually quite bored, so I decide to step out and go a bit further. I end up making it past an abandoned logger cabin. There's not really much left of this, it's mostly burnt to the ground, but I stand there for a few minutes and just keep on my way again. Now I know the way I'll make this interesting is going further than I've ever went before. I'm doing this alone outside of my music playing, but I actually feel quite good at this point. Now I keep hearing clicking sounds in the headphones, which is pretty strange. I'm quite annoyed because I don't want to replace these again, and I try pushing it into the Walkman harder, but it doesn't seem to make a difference. It's quite annoying because I don't know whether there's someone else around here or if it's just the headphones. Now I know, this is really stupid. I should just put them down and go and figure out what's happening and whether somebody's actually stalking me or not. But no, I decide just to keep going. Now this continues and I've accepted that it's a part of the headphones. And I go on for what feels like miles and I cannot find any of the abandoned cabins or houses that I want to explore. Plus it's starting to get a little bit dark. I can still see my way back, but it's probably not the best idea to be out here. But hey, I want to keep going. Now I cannot shake for the life of me the feeling that I'm either not well or there's an animal near me. There's no real big predators out here that could get a human at least, so I don't feel too scared, but it's a really weird feeling to have. I decide to stop for a moment and just crouch down, just to rest my feet. I don't really want to sit on anything because it's a bit wet from rainfall and I don't want to ruin my jeans. I take off my headphones and for a split second it hits me. The clicking sound's not actually coming from my headphones. It's coming from around me. I think that's pretty odd. Maybe there's some really big cricket or bug which is making this sound that I've not heard before, but it seems a bit powerful. Almost like a bassy thump sound that I've not heard before. I'm actually a bit concerned and decide to take off my headphones now and try and figure out what this thing is. After a few seconds the sound stops and I think that's pretty weird. But now I'm pretty scared, so I decide I'm not going to put my headphones on again. I have to be more cautious now. So I continue on my way. I do feel a bit unwell. I haven't felt right since I've set off. It's almost like I have a headache feeling and slight dizziness, which is pretty odd because I felt perfectly fine before. I think, oh, maybe I've just listened to music too loud again, and I'm just getting a little paranoid and probably should have brought more water with me. But the show must go on, so I continue further. And what do I see? An old abandoned house that's half burnt down. I can't believe my luck. I've never seen one like this before. I'm really excited to see this. I look around and realise that there's no other houses around or anything. And one thing that I notice that's a bit odd is none of the ground around it's burnt. It looks as though the house was burnt down, but there's no real evidence of a fire. I think this is really strange, but this thing's beautiful. There's a staircase which is collapsed, and it just looks like a really old cool house. I think, man, I wish I had my friends here to enjoy this with me. And I can see where a chair once was. I like to soak in the experience and imagine what kind of person would have lived here before and what kind of things would they do. Just as I'm doing this, I hear a loud sound above me for a millisecond that suddenly stops. Now with the adrenaline, I couldn't really focus on what the sound was, but without thinking, I quickly bolt out of the house. I look upstairs and I don't see a thing. Calm down, this is just an animal, I tell myself. It must be an animal, there's no stairs in there. It had to have climbed up. Stop being stupid, keep going. I'm really worried now, and my headaches got worse since I heard the sound. Now I think for a split second I can hear one of my friends in the distance, and suddenly it hits me. One of my friends must have stupidly followed me out here and decided to play a prank on me, and I smile a bit. I say, "Ha, that's really funny, you can come out now." To silence. How my friends have got up there I don't actually know, but this is a pretty wild prank to play on me, and probably a dangerous one because I could have probably just hit them if they jumped out. I say, "Ha, have a good time, I'm gonna leave you on top of here in the dark and you're not gonna be able to get down on your own." and I continued going. Now I thought this was great. I was going to play a prank on the pranksters who were trying to get me. I realised too that the clicking sound started again, and my friends must be messing with me. I can hear a very faint laugh too as I walk off, and I just start smiling to myself, thinking my friends are going to go home and they're going to try and get me again as I keep going. Now it is starting to get dark, but I want to go a little bit further. As I do, the clicking sound stops, and I actually feel a bit peaceful again. I just can't believe they followed me this far out into the woods. But something feels off. It's almost like my heart's telling me something's wrong, but my brain's telling me just to continue. I realise after a while that there's a cave above me too. I'd love to go into there, but it's dark now almost, and it's pretty dangerous, and I don't want to be stuck in there. I'm thinking too, maybe my friends are going to try and prank me up there, so I just sit by the entrance and wait for them to arrive. I can hear laughter again now. I smile to myself again and say, come on guys, let's head back, this is dangerous. As I say that, the laughter stops, and the clicking sound starts again, just louder this time. I'm sure they're above the cave now. I don't know how they've got up there, but this is pretty weird. Just as I'm having this thought, I can hear a very loud laugh coming from the belly of the cave. Suddenly, I realise something's wrong. I go to laugh and call out for my friends nervously, but it would be literally impossible for them to have got into the cave. I stop again, and I can hear a whisper sound. Something is calling my name to go into the cave. It sounds just like my friends, but not at all, if that makes sense. I realise something is so wrong. It's impossible for my friends to be out in that cave, plus it's pitch black. And the headache, I can't get rid of it. Suddenly, my senses come to life. I drop my Walkman on the floor and bolt it and start running back in the direction that I've come. What's worse now is that I don't actually know how I get back. I don't know where I've come from. I'm disorientated and in pain in the abyss. I suddenly see the house that I went to earlier, and I sprint towards it, screaming to my friends to stop and that it's not funny now. I don't want to go near the house because I don't know if it's my friends there, and just as I get close to it, I hear a sound moving upstairs again, and a voice. I don't take a second to understand what it actually is, and I keep going forward. I'm actually quite annoyed now because I've realised that I've also left my Walkman. But God, whatever that is can actually have it, and if it's my friends, I'll bring it back to me. As I'm running, I'm not sure if I can hear footsteps behind me. I have to stop for a second to catch my breath, and just out of the corner of my eye, I can see a massive shadowy thing following me. Now this thing has to be at least 7 feet tall, and I don't need to see anymore. I just start running. Now I used to do athletics, so I just about have the physique to do this, and I bolt it in a time that would make Usain Bolt jealous. I just keep going and hammering. Tears have actually welled up in my eyes, not because I'm scared but because of how bad my head is, and now I know that a person is probably stalking me. I can taste blood in my lungs where I'm trying so hard to get out of here and make it back to safety. I can't really hear the sounds behind me because my heart's beating so loud in my ears. After running for what feels like an eternity, I can see the old cabins that I recognise. I know I'm almost into safety now. I stop for a second and I can't hear anything behind me. I really quickly spin around to check and there's nothing there. But just as I stop, it starts again. The rhythmic clicking sound, along with my headache, which is now pulsating in my brain. I pick up the pace again, and just jog the rest of the way towards the tree line. I can see a light ahead of me, and I'm terrified. I jump behind a tree. But something that's so simple is actually the most peaceful sound. It's a car engine. It's a car. I made it back to the road where my parents are. My house isn't far. I quickly jump out and flag down the first car I can see. Annoyingly, they don't stop and just keep going. I'm gonna have to press on alone. I then walk at a quick pace, trying to get some air into my lungs again back towards where my home is. I can see my dad's car out the front, and I know that he's going to be mad that I've not said where I've gone and that I'm not in, and also confused as to why I left. I come in and he's on the phone to my mum and says, "Oh, there he is," and puts the phone down quickly, says, "What's wrong with you? What happened?" And I barely explain the story, and my dad's face goes white. He never told me why, but I can tell something's off. He says, "Are you okay?" And I say, "Yeah." And he tells me, "Never go out into those woods again alone, do you understand me?" And I said, "Of course, but it could have been my friends." He said, "I don't want to hear it." And that was the last I ever spoke to about my dad of this experience. The next day, I spoke to my friends and they all laugh at me saying, "Yeah, that didn't happen." I now know that they didn't play a prank on me, and there was something out there that was following me. I want to tell you it was a person, but it just couldn't have been, unless it was some crazy psychopath in a camouflage suit that could run without making any sound on the slippery rocks that stalked me all day, or maybe it was something else. The thing that scares me so much about my experience is the fact that whatever this thing was could move so quickly. It could outrun me, an athletic runner, or formal one, and it could mimic my friends so well, to the fact that I was convinced that it was my friends out there playing a prank on me, and what's worse is it's got my Walkman, to this day probably. Since that experience, I never went out into those woods again, not even with my friends. I was almost hoping something similar would happen to them so they could believe me, but it just never did. And the headache, I've never had anything like it, and why was it worse with the sounds I would hear? It still gives me nightmares to this day, and I just don't know what to think of it. I've never experienced anything like it in my life, and I just hope that I never have to again. I still have nightmares about it, and I just hope to God whatever this thing was, it doesn't follow me again. I'm so scared even writing this. So this happened about 12 years ago. My family owns a farm in the heart of Indiana reservation. One winter, I was home for Christmas taking care of the farm while my parents were out away Christmas shopping. I was home alone. So while late in the night, I hear all of our cows freaking out. I knew it has to be wild dogs that are rampant in the area. And I know something's off. So I throw on some boots, grab a gun, and load it up, heading out to the field. This was a perfect scenario for a horror movie. It's cloudy but full moon, and it was breaking through the clouds just right up into the snow. I ran out into the middle of the field, and just in time I see two dogs that are starting facing up towards each other fighting. I think perfect, 2 for 1. So I pumped the shell of my 12 gauge, and then it happened. The two dogs heard the rack. They both stopped, looked over at me on their back legs. I immediately froze. Every story I hear about skinwalkers and all the other native legends I grew up with flew to mind. Keep in mind I'm a white guy, and up until then, these are just boogeyman stories to me. I sprint back for home and never look back. So about 3 years ago, I went out camping with my girlfriend, and she's always expressed interest but never been out there before. The spot we went to go in is a Horror National Forest and is my go-to camping/traveling trail spot in the forest. My family's been going here for about 6 years, and my friends introduced me about 10 or so years ago. So we went for a weekend trip, and I'm glad we didn't go any longer. When we got there, everything was going well, except we noticed a group of people that were hanging out next to our campsite. They were just stargazing and ended up leaving. Then around midnight is when the weird stuff started to happen. At first it sounded like somebody was laughing at us, but the laugh never ended and got very high pitched as it kept going. After a while we got kind of scared and went into my tent to try and sleep. and that's when the laugh/noises moved up higher, and then start circling around the campsite. After a while of wondering what was happening, it suddenly stopped and then starts again around 3 AM. When it started again, the fire was going out, so I went to stoke the fire with my shotgun and flashlight in hand in case there's any coyotes that come up to the campsite, but I don't see anything or hear any movements below. This went on until 6 AM and then stopped, and finally we were able to get some rest. After we woke up and checked around the campsite, we don't actually see anything out of the ordinary, so pack up. Once we were packed up and good to go, I start my vehicle and it's completely dead. This really freaks me out as I'm always paranoid about leaving things plugged in, and it's really weird for it to be completely gone. I wasn't able to get a jump from anyone. Now after this happened, I told my friend who had shown me the campsite and also informed me that there's a campsite about 25 miles away with a cabin. He gets freaked out. He told me about 2 incidents when he's had one at a campsite and one at a cabin. At the campsite, he stated that one night after he had returned from the trail, he went to go to bed but had stayed up to let the fire keep going and have a few drinks. While he was hanging out, he was just looking off into the distance and sees a pair of eyes staring at him. He puts a flashlight and high-powered gun there, but as soon as he does, he can't find it again. So he packed up and went to bed. He didn't tell us because he didn't want to scare us. At the cabin, he was hanging out with his older brother and just chilling by the fire outside when they both see eyes staring at them from the trail that leads into the woods. They stated that at the height of the eyes, it's probably 7 feet tall plus. They started shooting their rifles there, which are 230-30s, and the eyes disappear. But once they're done, they reappeared closer at the point where they're both freaked out enough to get into the cabin and not leave until daylight. We have no idea what this could have been, but all felt very scared and don't know why these events keep happening. My grandmother on my mother's side has always been very superstitious, for lack of a better word. She's not religious, but she does believe in paranormal. Her mother was full-blooded Navajo and her father was Irish. Either way, she had never been anywhere east of Montana and she grew up in Nevada. One year, when I was in grade school, we went to visit her. Most of the visit was pretty uneventful, typical boring old people stuff. Except she always kept her curtains drawn shut and would peek out the window, and when somebody said, "What are you doing?" she said, "The Yendaloshi is watching me." This went on for nearly the entire visit until a few days before we're due to leave. My grandma and my then baby brother, who's now 19, were all in the front of the yard that evening, planting flowers, when all of a sudden my grandma starts shouting, and insert little brother's name here, to get away from the creature, it's not safe. Of course, in Nevada, we assume it's a rattlesnake, so we run outside and see my grandmother clutching my little brother and shaking in terror against the side of the house. Standing out in the yard, there's a large black Great Dane sized dog. It was staring at my grandmother with an intensity that I've never seen before. It kept looking at us, gave a little hound and bolts off. I remembered thinking it moved so quick it didn't look real. I asked my grandmother what happened. She kept repeating, "It found me. It found me." A while ago, when I was in early high school, I was left at home for some reason. I can't remember the reason, but I was left home alone after a lot of reaching my teenage years. So, a little information on my house. I don't live in a rural area in particular. I certainly wouldn't call the area civilized though. There are barns within walking distance of my home. I guess the area is developing because there are also subdivisions around. Also, my home has a sliding glass door, not another one, that leads to the back deck. So, I was home alone when I heard a knock at the door. It's common for my parents to sometimes leave the home without their house keys, so I have to let them in. My family has a special knock though, so we know it's one of us. This knock doesn't sound like one, so I just ignore it because I don't want to deal with the stranger at the door. Whoever it was knocked again in a familiar pattern, so I reluctantly went to the door. When I get there, I see no one. I figured that whoever it was had just left because I took my sweet time getting there. Then, I guess I heard something, or rather, someone come into the sliding glass door. Then I guess I heard a sound just off to the side. Another thing, members of my family would never really go to that door, so it's kind of weird. So I went to the door and don't realize anything. I slightly opened the sliding door and hear a voice. It sounded like my mother coming from underneath the deck, I guess. I only say this because I definitely heard the same voice from my mother, but it's not my mum, and nothing's in front of me. I can't remember exactly what it said, but something like, "Open the door," and my name. Now I'm a super paranoid guy, and I know my mum wouldn't be hiding there if she wanted to. Hours later, my mum actually shows up and I tell her what happened, and she confirmed that she was not at the house earlier and did not try to get me to open the back door. So for years, I didn't really know what to make of the experience. Now it was truly a minor thing, but at the same time, that's pretty weird that something was trying to mimic my mum's voice and trying to get me to open a door. Of course it could have been in my head, but things like that are pretty scary. To be honest, I'd be less scared if there was somebody actually there and I could account for that, but that's the thing, I can't. So 2 months ago, my boyfriend and I moved out of a bigger city to the woods. We both lived in the country before, and my home is in the next town over. We both feel comfortable here, but since we've moved, things have got progressively weirder. We lived on about 2 acres of mid-Michigan, and behind the house is nothing but woods. We have 2 animals, one 1-year-old Doberman and a 4-year-old Maine Coon, which is a big breed cat. It is currently midwinter here, and we've been hit with a few good snowstorms since Christmas. Also, the house is surrounded by motion sensing lights and cameras. Okay, context over. The first week we moved in here, there was what sounded like some big thing pacing back and forth in the tree line. When we called out to whatever it was, there was no reply. But the pacing doesn't stop. This continued every night, pretty often. Now within about a week, whatever it was had started murmuring to itself in the woods. This creeped the life out of me. And what was really weird was that we would be out on the patio, and the next thing, the motion lights turn on for no reason. Not thinking much of it, because we live in the woods, there's all kinds of animals that can come here, so I just ignore it. Yet over the next few nights, it got to the point where the lights just don't ever turn off, like something's constantly triggering it. Remember, we're in Michigan. There's been a good coat of snow on the ground for weeks now. Theoretically, you should see tracks from whatever it is keeping the lights on, right? No, nothing, not even deer tracks. Since this has begun happening, our animals are acting really strange. The Doberman sits at the back door and barks. Not like any bark, but the kind you get when something's about to go wrong. I've literally never heard him so amped up before, and we've had him since 8 weeks. Yet, when you open the door to let him out, he becomes timid. He won't wander too far into the back, and he'll never go out beyond the tree line. Sometimes he won't go outside at all. It's like he wants to just sit there and make his presence known. The Mancoon is just interested in our backyard, constantly staring off though, as though his gaze is broken into something he can't snap out of, and he starts meowing like he's telling us something. Though tonight, however, that was the most scary thing that I've experienced before. So our sliding door goes into the living room just beyond the patio. So we're sitting on the couch winding down for the night, and both animals are actually with us too. I suddenly hear what sounded like our dog outside whimpering in distress, like he's cold or hurt. However, the dog's no more than 5 feet from me on the couch. I try to ignore this, but it continues until I wake up my boyfriend. It then stops, and I think, maybe I'm just hearing this, but he falls back asleep, and I put the blanket on him. Then I hear the sounds of our cat whimpering like it's hurt. This is when I get up to make my boyfriend check it out. He walks the perimeter of the house, and I peek my head out of the side to watch. We both hear branches snapping in the woods, but no tracks. And I hear the whining again. Our motion has not been to move in the last 6 hours, and just listen. Our cameras haven't picked up anything, and there's no tracks in the snow. I don't know what to do. When I was 15, my father and I loved to go camping. This is something we did whenever we had the opportunity. There was some really good forest around where we lived, full of life and sounds. Probably the most peaceful part for my dad at least was the sounds of the nature. It annoyed me, but my father loved it. It made a difference from the mechanical sounds of the job where he worked. So on one particular evening, we do some fishing. We're having a great time looking up at all the stars. The sun's just beginning to set, and you can just about see the northern star in the hemisphere. We decide to call it a night. Now while we're walking back to our camping site, my dad continually stops, not saying why. Now normally I just make fun of him, but I can see that he has his hand on his gun. I know something is wrong. I don't want to scare my dad and act as though I don't notice anything. Every time that we begin walking, we can hear a sound, louder than our own footsteps, that can't be identified as one specific thing. It's hard to describe, but almost like a deep thud, just beyond your range of hearing, but you can still notice it, if that makes sense. So anyway, we continue towards our camp when my dad suddenly shouts out, "Hey, you stop immediately, I have a gun." I ask my dad what's going on. He tells me to be quiet. He says you take one more step and this is your last warning. And with that, gunfire. There's a few moments of silence before my dad grabs my hand and tells me to run. I don't know what's going on and begin crying in fear. What's more strange is we run past our campsite. We run all the way back to where our car is and speed out of there. He tells me to never tell my mum what happened and that he'll explain one day. Now as you can imagine, this is the most terrifying experience in my life. Eventually my dad did tell me. He said he thought we were being followed by a very large man, but he eventually caught a glimpse of something in the moonlight. Now it looks like a person, yes, but upon closer inspection, he can tell that it's definitely not a normal person. He describes it to me as a skinwalker. Now I don't know too much about them, just that they're to be avoided. He said that's when he pulled the trigger. He knows he landed a direct hit on it, or at least within an inch of this creature, and it didn't even move an inch. This is when he made us begin running. So this happened 17 years ago, so please forgive me if the exact details are fuzzy. So it's the summer of 1999. I was spending the vacation with my mother in New Mexico. I was a 12-year-old at the time and had a severe attitude. I made friends easily with a few girls that lived just around the corner from my mum's home. We spent every moment together that summer. We're a group of 4, all of us thinking we were older and smarter than everyone. Nikki, Katie, Julie, and myself were the last generation of home phone lines, playing outside on the trampoline until dark and sleepovers. We would watch VHS tapes, listen to cassette tapes on our Walkman. It was okay to let your children walk around town at night, and we very rarely locked our front door. We had no cell phones or internet. My backyard had a concrete wall around it and a gate. Now behind the wall was desert as far as the eye could see. Just a barren wasteland of dirt, cacti, shrubs and mountains way off in the distance. This town had a major railroad track running straight through it. There was a major street that had a gas station, restaurant and hotels and attractions. We all received the same warnings from our parents. Stay out the desert, stay away from the tracks, and don't walk the main strip at night. Do you think we listened though? Absolutely not. Julie, Nikki, and I spent our days walking through the desert, crossing the tracks down the strip to Katie's home. Sometimes we would just walk around till dusk. Some days, we would go to my home to jump on the trampoline. This particular day, we get to Katie's house prepared to stay the weekend because her parents are out of town. We were gonna have a party. The first few nights, the girls would jump in from a spiral staircase to a giant beanbag. I refused to participate in this, due to my extreme fear of heights. When we got down to the sleepover business, so to say, and decided to watch the original Exorcist, you know, the one with Linda Blair, I didn't sleep. The second night, we all told our parents that Katie's mum was going to drive us to the movies. We all got money from the movies, then promptly walked down to the strip to get junk food. Now, I wish I could say that we're aware of the surroundings, but we're not. We were absolutely oblivious of the man who followed us all the way back to the home. I feel that I should mention that Katie's parents are loaded. They have a huge property with numerous buildings, broken down cars, that her dad was remodeling. Their house had a large open kitchen and dining and living room. There were no walls and the whole room was lined with windows. There were 2 doors front and back. The day was just as planned. We get our junk food and make it home safely. We made pizza in the oven, and for some reason, one of the girls turns on the news. As we're eating, we hear a story about staying inside because there's a report of a suspicious man walking on the strip. That's it, suspicious man. We laugh and joke about it. Fast forward a couple of hours. I don't remember what happened, but as girls do, someone said something that hurt Julie's feelings and she storms out of the home. I went after her, opened the front door just in time to see her lighting a cigarette. I sat there with her on a bench while she gone on about the other 2. Suddenly, the air grows thick with anxiety. Julie felt it too. I quietly ask her if she feels as though she's being watched. She responds with a little nod, and then we're blinded. Someone's in a car in the driveway. My heart's racing as I stood up, pulling Julie out of the spot she seems to be stuck in. As we turned to run inside, the man made a sound. I can't describe this sound other than a high-pitched squeal that turned into a growl. I was scared beyond all reason. but somehow I'm able to get myself and Julie inside. The moment we're inside, the headlights go off. It's pitch black again. I lock the door and turn off the light. By now, Julie has regained her composure to tell the other two what's happened. As I frantically check the back door and turn every light off, I tell them to be quiet and listen by the back door. I heard the car door close. I was praying to every god that he would go away. Then, right by my cheek, the door handle started to turn slowly. Now frantically, I crawl away from the door. I now move over to where my friends are. For the next 2 or 3 hours, we sat still, listening to this man bang on every window or door trying to get inside. The phone was located across the room right next to the 2 windows. I finally got up, gathering the courage to run to the phone. I call my mum. I tell her that we're all alone and someone's trying to breach the house. I hung up with her and waited. Julie screamed to the man that we called the cops, and all of a sudden, the banging stops. We sat there listening to him getting in his car. Then, the sound starts again, that turned into a growl. He's gone now. My mum and stepdad then show up, checking out the place. They found tyre tracks and cigarette butts in the driveway. Whoever this was had been watching us for a while. The truly scary part is all the scratch marks on the windows and doors. Clearly not possible for a human to make. This is why I know it was a skinwalker. Needless to say, Katie spent the rest of the weekend at Nikki's house and had a great story for her parents, which of course they didn't believe. Even to this day, I'm certain this was something supernatural and not a normal person. I just hope they never come back to me. Me and my father would always go hunting together when I was younger. It's honestly one of the most fond memories I have of being young. There was nothing more exciting than getting back from school, going to see my dad, getting in his truck and going out hunting. Now, I never shot any guns at the time. Of course I didn't. I was far too young, but that didn't take away from the joy of the experience. What was better was we also brought Lucky, our dog, with us. She would keep me company, and I'd always have a great time with her regardless. Now, there was one incident that really shook my dad, and I knew it was bad back then because I'd never seen him shook before. I mean, I've never even seen him this shook after. Even back then I knew something was seriously wrong. So my story takes place 20 years ago. It's on one of them summer evenings. My dad and I go out hunting. We're having a really good time, to be honest. The only problem is there's far too many bugs around, and my dog keeps on barking randomly. It's a kind of bark that goes through you, and in the end I just look at her and tell her to shut up. I love her, but everyone has a breaking point. Anyway, we're having a really good time. We stop and make a small campfire, roast some marshmallows, feed my dog some dog treats. We start talking about things we've done throughout the week and how my school's going. I start telling my dad how much I love playing football, and how he says that if I keep it up, I might be able to go really far one day. As we're doing so, Lucky starts going mental. I just look at my dad with frustration. It made me jump. I've dropped my marshmallow into the fire, and it's now burnt. I go, come here girl, and reach for some more dog treats, but she doesn't seem interested. I think, she's finally stopped eating, I don't believe it, and laugh at my dad. But my dad's looking off to the side. I can tell something isn't right now. I go to say about the dog and he hushes me. He has a very serious look in his face. He tells me to get up now in a very low tone. Like he's going crazy though. Not barking now, but acting very passive aggressive with her head low to the ground, making this deep growl that I've never heard before. This alone terrifies me. My dad then says we gotta get out of here. Now I don't know what he's saying, but we immediately put the fire out, get the guns and our other stuff, and leave the marshmallows and dog trees. I know something's bad because my dog doesn't even go and reach for the trees. I ask my dad what's wrong, but he tells me to keep quiet. He eventually says, well, I just saw something. No hunters should be out in the area. I checked it out before, we're the only ones here. I don't know if it's a park ranger maybe, but why would they just be staring like that? Anyway, we're about halfway back to our truck. I'm annoyed because I don't know why we've had to pack up so early and I've left my marshmallows. We suddenly hear a voice coming from what seems to be directly behind us. We both stop. It sounds like one or two people talking to each other, but I can't make out a word of it. This is weird because I didn't think voices could carry over the sound of the bugs and stuff, especially not at this time of year. My dog begins doing this weird thing where she stands just in front of me and my dad and doesn't move like she's pointing. I then hear another snap. I look up and say, Dad, what the hell? Why is there a skull there in the bushes? I didn't think we had elk out here. Just as that happens, my dad grabs my arm and tells me to run. All three of us then bolt it to where the truck is. As we're running, we can hear the voices seeming to get closer and closer. I say, Dad, it's just a park ranger, relax, you can hear them, or hunters. He says, I've been doing this for way too long. That's no normal hunter or park ranger. The dog begins barking like crazy. We get into the truck and my dad floors it out of there. Now, he didn't tell me what he thought had happened at the time, but he began speaking to my mum about what happened. Now, I've never seen my dad look so scared in my life before, not even to this day. As I'm lingering around their door, I hear him say the word skinwalker. Now, I didn't know what it was at the time, but I learned in my adult life what it was, and I'm certain that's exactly what we saw on that day. This has left me feeling extremely shook, and I'd love some opinions. So last year, I had a very strange experience in a national forest out in California. I was by myself, on a road trip with my dog, and I was driving pretty far into the national trail, or more like national forest. Now, I should say I like to camp in national parks and forests, because it's isolate, so my dog can roam free. A trade-off for sketchy rough drives into parks sometimes. Now anyway, I was driving up this dirt road, kind of curling up a mountain around maybe 5 PM. It was very nice out, sunny and warm, with a slight breeze. Nothing serious happened, but I felt extremely uncomfortable driving into the area, and that feeling did not let up. Driving up the mountain, I felt like I shouldn't stay there, and I even texted my boyfriend about it, for as long as I could on my phone before I lost my service. I was looking for a sign of another person having been here lately, but I don't see anything. I'm beginning to worry now. I pull over, Getting out of my car with my dog, looking over the edge and notice a dead squirrel, some broken glass mixed in with dirt and gravel. Yucca, my dog starts to growl slightly. She is vocal, but I've almost only ever seen or heard her growl with other dogs. Not for no reason. Now I did see her growl at a possum once, so it could be something she smelt maybe. This place continued to make me feel quite on edge, but I pride myself in being an independent traveller and backpacker, so I decided to continue at least a bit further with my grumbling dog. I need to see if I can find a good place to camp at. I continued to notice more dead animals. Keep in mind, no one is going to be going more than 5 or 10 miles an hour up this thing, and that's if there's anyone even there. I hear men's voices. They sound close and I think I should call out to them, so I stop my car, but kind of freeze up and feel like I shouldn't. You know that feeling you get in your gut sometimes that something's just wrong and you're in a situation that you somehow shouldn't be? Well, it was that. Now I can't really make out what they're saying. I don't see any sign of people anywhere, and I get back in my car and continue to drive forward and cautiously look for where the voices are coming from. Now I've never ran into people in a national park or forest before when I've gone this deep in. The unsettling feeling I'm having grows. It just doesn't make sense why they're up here. I give up being brave and go to turn my car around. I honestly don't remember how Yucca was acting on the way down. I was scared and focused on getting out of there. I distinctly remember being surprised at her grumbling when we were standing outside of my car, kind of dangerously quick when I went back down the mountain, not seeing any sign of anyone. I decided to spring for the luxury and get a hotel for the night. I mean, it makes sense, right? I figured I was just fine. Huge and open spaces can be intimidating, I told myself. The voices? They could have been echoing from somewhere else far away and just sounded close. Now animals die, glass gets broken. Nothing happened too. Cool. But I remember this place. It just sticks with me. Whenever I'm watching scary movies and if I'm walking my dog in the woods at night, nothing compares to the feeling I had driving up the mountain, and it's honestly kind of interesting to me and also frightening. I recently happened across some information as well as some Native American lore that made me extremely uneasy. Now fast forward a year. I've mentioned this place to a few people and the haunting vibes it gave me, but nothing more. Googled the national park once and didn't see anything, but didn't look much either. I like scary movies and things of that nature, so my boyfriend and I were coming up on finishing our round trip yesterday. We were in Wyoming for a wedding. There were only 2 or 3 hours left and the sun had set, so we decided to listen to some scary podcasts. We went from the no sleep one to lots of different ones. Now I'm half paying attention, petting my dog, playing Pokemon on an emulator. And here's a story about Wendigos. It then very briefly says what they are and how they can mimic voices. I mean it when I say I had the worst chills ever when I heard that. I asked my boyfriend if he remembers the national forest, and I'm freaked out now. He says he does, and he reminds me that he texted me I was probably close to a Wendigo. I remember him saying that, but didn't know much about their lore and thought he was just being funny, like yeah, Bigfoot stalking you or some other dad joke. He was like, no. I mean, I was mostly joking, but I said it specifically because you were hearing voices that you couldn't trace. Obviously, there's a ton of questionable information out there, but I tried to find more reputable websites and authentic experiences. I then looked up the missing people search in the area I was in, Mendicano, and I went through different websites and news articles of people going missing. They're all a little hidden underneath national park websites and pictures of trees. I remembered looking up the forest I was in about a year ago and didn't see anything and realised these stories didn't seem to be spoken about much. This piques my intuition. I then searched for the exact area I was in. It started with that over 100 people in the last 8 years had gone missing and not been found, many of which are found dead. Now this terrifies me. I didn't know any of this before I went in there. Remembering how unsafe I felt and how much I wanted to get out of there terrifies me. I felt so uneasy, and to this day, even hearing a voice terrifies me if I don't know where it's coming from. I have never went back to that national park since. I don't want to. So my father was a firefighter, and he had really inspired me to do the same. He would always tell me these stories about things that would happen, things that wouldn't happen, the challenges, and just how much joy it would actually bring to him doing a good job. Now my dad loved going outdoors, and so did I. We actually spent a lot of our times going exploring the woods or going fishing. Sometimes even hunting, but not as much as I got older, but that's another story. We'd also go on camping trips and just loved being outside generally together. And living in such a heavily wooded area, it was only natural that I followed the same and fell in love with the woods like he did, and wanted to be a firefighter too. It took a lot of hard work and training, but one day I became a firefighter and I absolutely loved it. Now the thing I liked more than anything was when we would get calls to go out into the great outdoors. Now my father actually said the same. He just liked the fact that you're in nature and you feel kind of at peace when you're doing your job, and it's actually a lot more calm than normal. Especially when the elements were at play, like it might be misty or foggy. I don't know, it just made it a really cool job. But however, there was one story that my dad told me about the woods that I could never forget and never made sense to me. He said it was something him and his friends who went on the call out would never really speak about to their peers or anyone above them, because they were worried that they just wouldn't be believed. There was a certain area that every time they got a call into, things would go weird. The radios just would not work. They always felt as though they'd walked into an area where the atmosphere changed and they just had a really weird vibe. Now on one night in particular, they get a call out just like any other, and they know that they're heading to this area in the woods. So they all feel a little hesitant, but they're all trying to psych each other up. They have to go and investigate an apparent missing person in the woods. Now, this isn't something they would usually do, but they were in the area so decided to help. They were looking for an elderly man who was apparently dressed in white clothing like a nightgown. Now, to most people this would be pretty normal, but just considering the area they were going to, they all felt a little weird about it. They eventually make it to the area that they have to search, and they have to get out of their vehicles because the woods are quite dense. They have some flashlights and they start off. Now they search for a good hour and can't find anything. They end up splitting up to cover more areas. Now my dad is actually relatively calm at this point, convincing himself that the woods are fine and it's just in his imagination. He goes to radio to his buddy that he cannot find anything and thinks they should probably head back, because if they can't find anything now they're not going to. As he does so, he realises that his radio is not working. Now, he worries for a second but realizes, oh yeah, this is what always happens in this area, and tries on a backup channel but still has the same issue. He then realizes that he has to turn around now because what's worse than one missing person is two. He thinks he can see his friend up in the distance and calls out to him, but there's no answer. George, I'm here, can you hear me, buddy? Nothing. He thinks this is pretty weird, but maybe George is just too engrossed in the situation. Now, my dad takes one step forward then stops. He says he gets a feeling that he's never felt before, like something's really off with the whole situation. He's frozen in his footsteps as his voice grows a bit weaker. George. He slowly turns his flashlight on to where he can see a man standing, and he realizes it must be the missing person. It's not his fellow firefighter, it's somebody wearing all white. My dad says the moment the flashlight hits this figure, he can realize that it doesn't seem to have any hands or feet. It's hard to describe because of the mist, but my dad's sure it's not his mind playing tricks on him. He then sees this figure slowly turn around, and he says his face is absolutely horrifying. It's almost disfigured, but not, if that makes any sense. He does this disgusting smile with no teeth, and, like that, he vanishes. My dad said he was frozen in the spot for at least 10 seconds. He tries to scream out for help, but he can't, and he just sprints. He runs as quick as he possibly can for what must have been at least 15 minutes before he eventually bumped into his buddies. His friends are immediately really concerned, and he tells them what happened, and they all look at each other like they know something he doesn't. One of the firefighters then explains to my dad that George has seen exactly the same thing. He found the missing person, but as he approached it, it vanished. Now what's worse is when they radioed this in, the station told them to stop being ridiculous and to get out there to keep searching. This time they went in twos in case anything else strange happened, and they didn't find anything. Now you can imagine, that story was pretty badly stuck in my mind when I get my calls to go out to the forest. Now, to be honest with you, it did escape my memory when I was on call because of course, I'm doing a job here. That was until one day I got called to the exact same area of the forest that my dad said he went to. It's not a missing persons this time, however, there's a small cabin that's on fire. Now we believe this is an arson attack, and we're pretty annoyed that not only are there people stupid enough to be out in the forest at night like this, but now we've got to go out into the middle of nowhere. We can't do our job that we're supposed to do in other areas and put out a fire. Of course it's understandable, you don't want half the forest setting on fire, but it's just generally annoying. I'll never understand why people do things like this, but I digress. I haven't shared this story with any of my buddies before, so they're not sure about this area. Luckily for us, when we get out of our vehicle, we all have perfect radio signal. Now the strange thing is, when we get to the supposed area of the fire, we actually can't see anything burning, let alone embers. Now that's really strange because where there's smoke there's fire, but we can't see smoke or fire, and we have to set out on foot. Now there's only 4 of us at the time, 2 of which are very close friends of mine and the other's a new guy. So we all have dismounted and get our flashlights, we do our radio checks and go through all the channels, everything's working fine. We begin by setting off in the general direction that the call was made. Now we walk for what feels like a very long time and can't actually see anything, and suddenly the new guy calls over to me, "Hey, I think I've got something." And what do you know? Up ahead of us is a burnt down cabin. Now it's strange because it looks as though it's rained recently, but there's no water present. There's just some tiny bits of smouldering. Well, that's one good thing. We don't actually have to put out the fire, but we have to make sure that nobody was there. And luckily for us, there was no signs of any life whatsoever. So we head over there to quickly check out what's happened and try and make a report of exactly what caused it. Now strangely, we can't seem to find any reason for the fire to have happened. We do call out to see if there's any idiots that have caused it and might be hiding waiting to see what happened, but we literally don't get any response at all. The report didn't take long, and as I'm standing there trying to figure out what happened, my buddy Ben lets out a terrifying scream. He says, "What in the hell is that?" We all turn around and we can see he is as pale as a ghost. I've never seen Ben like this before. Also, the new guy looks terrified too. The new guy won't even speak. They both swear to us that they saw a man in a white gown staring at them who disappeared into a tree. Needless to say, we didn't want to wait around for long, but we have to investigate what's happened. Suddenly, I become petrified with fear as I've realised what my dad said and where we must be standing. I'm pretty sure the new guy and Ben have just seen exactly what my dad saw, and George. I decide not to tell them the story because I feel like I'm having cardiac arrest currently, and I don't want to scare them further. We quickly do a look around and there's no one. To make this worse, not only one of them saw it, but two. So we know they weren't imagining it, and there's nowhere somebody could have ran or hid. We were too quick. We decide to call it into the station, but they just tell us that it must have been the new guy worrying and triggering some kind of placebo effect for Ben, but I know that isn't true. We have no idea what caused that fire, and no idea what the figure was, but the way it was described to me by my friends is exactly the same as what my dad saw. And when I told my dad what happened afterwards, he said promised me never go out into them woods again. Now luckily this was after I changed careers, but my god, he didn't have to tell me that twice. I have no idea what happened, and what terrifies me is that 4 people have all seen the exact same thing. A group of friends and I rented a place on a lake just to have a fun adventure and weekend. We were all young in our mid-20s and it's supposed to be a big party. For the most part, it is. The Friday and Saturday morning, we pretty much went all out to have a good blast on the water and just have fun. Stupid stuff really. Naturally, Saturday afternoon rolled around and we're all dead from going out, so decided it would be a night of no drinking and just having a chill evening and night. That's what it was, relaxed. So 9 PM comes rolling around and about 8 of us are inside the house and 5 are outside. The house was a 2-story with a 2nd-story deck / back porch. It was surrounded by the woods, and then down through the woods you could hit a lake. I'll mention that we had already experienced some weird vibes from the locals when we first arrived in town, mostly just backcountry old timers that assumed we're leering and irritating because we're having fun. But the town and the lake were large, so nobody really seemed to care. Anyway, 3 of my friends were on the upstairs back porch and my other friend and I were downstairs outside, just talking on this little area near the woods. I mean, it was otherwise just a really nice night. My friends and I were getting lost in conversation when all of a sudden there's a really weird feeling that comes over from us behind the woods. It was so strong that we both kind of went quiet, and out of nowhere, this large, loud chanting abruptly comes from the woods. I have no idea how far away it was because the way the lake's set up, so I'm pretty sure the voices carried through the forest. It sounded like cult chanting, and all of the voices are male. I mean, they were loud and perfectly in sync. I think we froze for all of 20 seconds before I can't contain myself and dart towards a home, with her following me. I don't know how to explain the feeling that the chanting given us, but it was truly evil. By the time we got up there, the chanting was gone and we said, "Did you guys hear that?" Obviously in a very freaked out voice, and they all heard it, and not seconds later, it started again. So the 5 of us are out here peering into the woods, listening to this chanting that would sometimes sound far away, then relatively close, all male voices in the weirdest language I don't understand, sounding like a strange extreme church. Then following the chanting, a loud bang like somebody whacked a huge piece of metal, a man wailing like in extreme pain. All of the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My brother and I were then staring at each other in a mixture of scared excitement and horror. The wailing stopped, and then it was back to chanting that eventually dies out. I was so freaked out by it I want to call the cops, because whoever was screaming is in a lot of pain. That mixed with the weird chanting just made me think that something terrifying gone on. One friend tried to say it had to be some drunk guys, but this can't be. Now no, I didn't call the cops, and I would have, but honestly, the forest was so large that it'd be very difficult to locate exactly where the sounds were coming from. We went in and got some of the others, but by the time they came out, the chanting had stopped. Someone wanted to go and explore, but obviously that's a bad idea. After that, I was so ready to go home. I can't explain how scared I was, and the feeling driving home was one that I'll never forget. It felt so wrong and evil. I can only imagine it was some weird occultists in the woods. Last year, I was backpacking in the deep mountains in Montana. I was nearby Libby Mountain, about 3 hours west of Glacier National Park. I was hiking alone and expected to encounter bears, grizzlies, mooses, etc. I am an experienced person with this and know how to handle them, so I'm not really worried. But this time, I was way out in the middle of nowhere with no one around for miles. Also, no cell service anywhere. And I didn't have my emergency beacon with me. Usually, I expect to see other hikers on the trail, but here none. I'm completely alone and know it. Well, it was like 9 miles to my camp at the Upper Cedar Lake. About half a mile away, the trail actually opened up and into a somewhat clearing and has great visibility around me. There were still trees and undergrowth covering the ground. A few minutes later, I see something scurrying across the trail maybe 50 feet ahead of me. I stop, froze, and wait. The creature noticed me and stood up into the undergrowth, but still almost covered by tall grass. It was about 3 feet tall, pitch black, and about 60 pounds, but obviously intelligent and quick. I assume it's a baby bear, so I don't move or make sound. I got my bear spray ready, fully expecting angry mama bear to come at me, but that didn't happen, because I would have surely been attacked or at least bluff charged at. Although I can't see its face through the grass, the creature stared at me invasively for 30 seconds. I don't move a muscle. Then suddenly, it huffed loudly at me, then ran through the grass to the side of the hill, and I never see it again. The sound it made was a lot like a deeper sound than you can expect from something small, like a bear's growl. I stood there silently waiting for a few minutes to see if the mum bear came, but it never did. One of the weirdest things that ever happened to me as a search and rescue person was one day we got a call out in the snow. We had a call out to go and rescue a man who went missing on a hiking trail out in the forest. Now I set off to search in the area designated to me. I have everything with me. The radio communication's very good, and I find some footsteps. Great. I go to radio this in to the other workers, but as I do, my radio dies. I go to turn on my flashlight, and this is struggling too. I call out quickly for anyone but get no reply. The snow's picking up a bit now. I decide the best thing to do is quickly follow the footsteps and see if it's the person we need, get them out of there and try and get radio signal on a hill. As I'm following the footsteps, I get a strange feeling that I'm being followed that I've never felt before. It's odd because obviously when you're looking for someone it's quite the opposite. What's worse is I go to flick on my flashlight and it's died now. I switch in some new batteries and this doesn't work again too, which is really odd. It's something I've never experienced before or since. I keep following the footsteps until suddenly I realise they just stop. Now it's strange because there's literally nothing around. No other snows disturbed whatsoever. It's like whatever this thing was just vanished. Just as I'm standing there, the feeling that I'm being followed is unbearable. And for 2 seconds I can hear voices all around me that stop just as soon as they start. I realise this isn't what we're looking for, and I quickly sprint back the way I've come. I'm still looking around, but I don't see any signs of anyone. Just as I get back to where I started, I can hear my radio coming to life. We found him. We got him. I radio in, oh that's great, I was just following the footsteps. Where are you guys? And when they reveal their location to me, my heart drops. They're 3 miles away from me. They say the man's alive and well. And to this day, I have no idea what them footsteps were, or why they stopped suddenly. My team investigated the whole area just to see if anyone else was lost there, but there was no one. Now I work as an emergency technician, and I had one call out that I'm never going to forget in the woods. Apparently there was a fire, and people could hear screams of people. Now, of course to me that means I'm going to have to go and deal with some either potentially really hurt people or dead people, so I'm not really looking forward to this one. We eventually dismount from our vehicle, and I have all my gear with me. I run to the area where I can hear the screams next to where the fire was, but there's no one to be seen. I can hear the screams and shout out, "I'm an emergency medic, what's wrong?" The second I do that, all of the screams stop, and it's dead silent. I can just hear the police sirens in the distance as some more support arrives. I look at my colleague and he's gone pale. Paler than I've ever seen him before. We search for hours with the police but can't find anyone or anything. Turns out nobody was hurt from the fire at all, but why could we hear screams like this? To this day I still don't understand what happened. Me and my brother always liked to go exploring the deep woods. Now it probably wasn't the best of ideas, but we didn't have to go very far on the bus to reach a really good forest that we could go into. It was almost like a jungle. The grass was almost as tall as I was, it felt like, and my brother was always there with me to enjoy it. Now there was one particular night that I'm never going to forget when we went investigating. We knew we couldn't be out for too long in case it got dark, and my brother says that he wants to go and explore something on the side and just to wait here. I say sure and let him go. Well, thinking it might be a game, I quickly got up and sprinted after my brother. I sprint for what feels like an eternity and realise that I'm now lost. Just as I do that, I hear a voice scream out, "Don't take another step forward." I'm frozen and don't know who's called this to me. I'm scared now and run backwards calling out for my brother. I quickly make it up the tree to see what's happened, and I can't see my brother. Then I look up and to my horror, there must be a 50 feet drop just ahead of where I was, completely hidden by the grass. If I took another step forward, I would have fell to my death. It was only when I got older that I realised just how dangerous this is, and I quickly hurried down the tree, and eventually am reunited with my brother. I told him what happened and he's absolutely furious at me, but more angry at himself for going off too far to hear what happened. We never went back to them woods again, and I'm just thankful that I survived that day. But to this day, I have no idea what called out to me or who it was. Maybe it was my subconscious somehow saving me, or the paranormal. I don't know. About 10 or 15 years ago, a buddy of mine and I were camping in the Wenatchee area of the Olympic National Forest, south of the Olympic National Park. We found a remote site that was fairly isolated, about as far into the wilderness as you can still get a vehicle. My buddy and I camped out about once a month back in these days. We were looking for Bigfoot evidence and whatnot. Our second night was by far the most eventful, where we're sitting at the campfire and I think I hear noises. I hear faint singing, mostly ones in upper registers, like the choir of females. It was very faint, but I can definitely hear it, and it seems to be getting louder to me. I figured it wasn't the wind playing tricks. However, I kept hearing it every few minutes and it's getting louder. Finally, my friend heard it too. We eventually pluck up some courage and manage to investigate what's happening. Now, we did a circle search pattern and found out it was coming from the road. We walked down to the road nearest to the campsite, which is about 300 yards away, and find an old church with a group of children all singing rhythmic church rhymes. The church has a small van that you can actually see just parked outside. I wave hi, and nobody responds to me. I don't understand why they're doing it at this time, especially out in the middle of nowhere. I don't want to call it a cult, but I have no idea what it is to this day. Needless to say, we quickly got out of there. A little over a decade ago, I met and started dating a girl who lived in Tole Country, Connecticut, so I hauled up from way down south for a visit. I know it's a bad idea to cross, maybe in this case, state lines for a relationship, but I'm in my early 20s. So at any rate, perhaps the one thing I found that took away from all that was said is involving a parking lot in the country of Connecticut. Here in the south, at least, we tend to think of up north as big cities and industry. I was honestly surprised when I got to her place. It's in the woods with rolling hills, and even the distant moaning of cows. Now, I can't exactly say what, despite all this familiar terrain, was going on, but something felt inherently different. This isn't something I can outright put to words, but there was something that enchanted me about the northern wilderness. I had to drink it in as much as I could. I spent a lot of time dragging her through the brush. We explored some abandoned mills, found an odd ring of chairs in a clearing, and just generally frolicked and had a good time during our journey. Except this one place we found. I don't know exactly what it is, maybe an old theatre or a roller skate rink. All I can remember that it is painted black, and there are these murals of outer space scenes like flaming comets and UFOs and whatnot, maybe from the 60s or 70s. I might be wrong. Now, I'm a seasoned explorer of the abandoned. I even went into the so-called devil house of the Falkland at night, alone in parts of it, and don't flinch, so I'm used to strange things. I think you can't really live in the country that much and not have a tale of one or two things that doesn't add up. The place bugged me out. It wasn't anything stereotypical like a cold feeling or an intense sort of dread. It was more a feeling that something's wrong, out of place, even though we're there, exploring and it's a date. Here's the thing, I want to go in. I wish I did, but I simply couldn't even try. Something about the thing was so foreign and off that I couldn't compel myself to do anything but turn back, and that's what I did. I've never experienced anything like this in my life, but I have a feeling there was either bad people in there or something bad had happened. I'd like to go back one day to find out, but this just seems really odd, especially the fact that there's nothing else around it too. My friends and I were camping out in the woods one day when we realised that there's a light off in the distance. Originally we thought that maybe it was a star, but we realised that it's actually moving down too quick and it's below the tree line. We're not sure what this is, so we signal back to it with our flashlight and call out, but there's no reply. Now that's a little odd. Now we're not too worried initially, but we can hear a heavy breathing coming from that direction. We do the same again and realise that it's coming towards us very quickly now. Just as I turn to my buddy to say that this doesn't feel good, I hear a blood-curdling scream that I've never heard before. It didn't sound human, and now whatever the light was bolting towards us. We quickly gathered up the things we needed, leaving our campsite behind, and bolted to my buddy's car. I quickly glance behind and I can see that this light is still following us. It's not even going towards the campsite now, it's going directly towards us. My buddy slams on the accelerator, and I can see that thing still chasing us, but stopping just before the road. I have no idea who or what this was, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out. I've lived in Southern California my entire life. If you know anything about California, it's very diverse. Up north is filled with mountains and trees, and the south is a lot more, well, city-like. This summer, I decided to take a trip to Tahoe. It's a beautiful place and my first time being upstate. I'm going to chop this story up into segments so it's easier to read. On day 1, I settle into the cabin around 5 PM. After an 8-hour drive, I'm really tired. I went and lay down in the bed that was in the loft. It was quiet. It was like being in a different world. I was so used to cars zooming by it and people talking right outside my home. But this is quiet and it's peaceful. I managed to fall asleep fairly quickly. Now, around 4 hours into my sleep, I'm jerked up and I look around for a bit and I hear some tapping sounds. It's really strange. I look around to see where it's coming from, but to no avail. It sounded like somebody's tapping on the window part of the back door. I figure I'm being paranoid and fell back to sleep. Day 2. Nothing really happens and I fall asleep fine. Day 3. I wake up early in the morning, maybe 4. I heard a crash coming from the attic ladder. That's placed conveniently right behind the couch I'm sleeping on. I didn't move. I can hear a few footsteps. Now, you know the feeling when somebody's staring at you? That's how I feel. I'm on my side staring straight ahead. Suddenly, I felt like somebody or something crawls over me. I felt their 2 hands on either side of me, and I knew if their face was only inches away from mine, I should be able to see them. Now I'm facing straight ahead, and I'm not really going to turn to see who it is if they're actually there. Now they stay there for what feels like forever, until I felt them crawl backwards off of the couch, and I heard the dog let out a muffled bark, in which somebody shushed her, then let out a good yell. The presence stayed there for what feels like an eternity, till I heard the footsteps going out the back door. Still, I didn't move. I'm paralysed with fear. Needless to say, I didn't go back to sleep. I checked on my friends a bit later when I felt the coast is clear. None of them had left their rooms that night. I told them my experience and they said that I was being paranoid. I halfway agreed with them, and our day went out as planned. Now, later that day on day 3, after a day at the lake with my friends, we come back to the quiet and cozy cabin. The caretakers of the cabin told us that there's a river a bit further back into the woods, maybe a 15-minute walk away. My friends and I decided to stay back and rest, so I took some bug spray, a small backpack with snacks and my phone. It was pretty straightforward. There was tall grasses on either sides of the trail. It was a thin path, but pretty easy to navigate. When I got to the riverbank, there were 2 picnic tables. I didn't want to get eaten by mosquitoes, but I stupidly wore sandals. I put my bag on the table and started my walk back to the cabin. For some odd reason, the path seems distorted. What was once a straightforward trail was now covered in rough terrain. I noticed that the tall grass on the side of the path has been disturbed. It's like something huge, gigantic, had walked across the grass. I think maybe it's a bear, since the locals told us that bears were a problem at this time of year, but the sheer size of it made me second guess that. I was a bit taken back by this. However, I continued and made it back to the cabin, and then back to the river. I was a little frightened now. I kept telling myself I'm just freaking out and I should enjoy the nature. I sat down at one of the tables and watched the river. After a while, I felt like there was something staring at me. I look around assuming one of my friends was on their ways to prank me, but there was no one. Across the river, I noticed a bit of brush that was shaken up. There was a clearing in the bushes that was fenced off by 2 logs in an X shape. The longer I sat in the spot, the more worried I got. I couldn't help but feel like there was something right behind the thick brush that I couldn't see. I went down the river hoping to come across something, but nothing. No fish, no frogs or roads, just mosquitoes, and a bunch of them at that. Disappointed with the lack of anything. Really, I just went to sit back at the table, and that's when I heard it. It was a noise I can't describe. It's a scream, and a gurgle, as if whatever it was had a mouthful of water. It's completely inhuman. I froze. In the moment I should have been running for my life, but I freeze. I heard rustling in the bushes behind me, the ones I was worried about earlier. Then again, the scream. It's the loudest thing I ever heard. I run. I sprint through the forest. What should have been a quick trip back to the cabin was anything but. After about 10 minutes of sprinting, I notice I'm lost. I stop for a few moments, frantic, trying to see if I can find anything that looks familiar. I saw a bridge that I'd crossed on my way there, and I started sprinting. I thought to myself, why didn't the damn thing kill me? I had stopped for a good minute now, but I could hear it chasing me. It was a game for the thing. I can't explain it any differently. Every time I stopped, it would as well. I finally made it back to the cabin, and instead of going inside, I stood on the porch, faced the forest and cried. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary, but I knew it was still out there. I didn't want to turn my back, so I sat there for hours silently crying, occasionally checking my phone, and well, writing this, I don't have any idea what actually happened. There's nothing I can compare it to other than maybe a Wendigo. All I know is that I'm not going to be going back to that river again. If anyone has any idea what happened, please let me know, because it really haunts me to this day. One of the weirdest things that happened while working as a park ranger was something I heard on the radio one time. There was a distress call coming from an unknown situation, and somebody was literally screaming for their life over the radio, saying that it's coming, it's coming. Every time that the responder made contact, they kept saying, I don't know what it is, but it's a dark figure that's chasing me. God, why is it so tall? This went on and off for a horrifying 3 or 4 minutes until eventually there was complete silence. It turned out the call was being made by a hiker who was literally never seen again after this happened and virtually vanished without a trace. The following is not my own story but my father's, so I'm going to share it to you how he's explained it to me. So, my father worked as a fire ranger for quite a long time, and this is his story. So basically, he was on duty as usual, and this often meant much time on his own out in the wilderness, something that he didn't really have a problem with. He was constantly on lookout for fires or even the slightest signs of one. He said that earlier in the day he had a strange feeling that something was about to happen, but he couldn't quite figure out exactly what it was, and he was never able to shake the feeling. Well, it gets to nighttime, which actually makes it a lot easier to spot fires, and just off to a bridge that my dad's familiar with, he spots the signs of fire. You can see a flame, but weirdly, it's joined by a few others. What's most strange of all is that they all seem to be moving slightly. Now this seems odd. It's clearly not a natural fire, and it doesn't appear to be somebody starting one, as the fire's not grown, so my dad just watches very intently with the binoculars. He said he does this for a good minute or so before he decides that he should probably head down now and investigate what is actually happening. He says as he's walking closer and closer to the site, he can hear a strange kind of chanting. He can't really make out any words, but he's unsure whether he's gone across some kind of Native American thing that he didn't know about, and maybe it's a residual haunting or what it is. But then he takes a look closer with the binoculars. He can see a group of about 10 or 12 people, all dressed exactly the same, chanting, standing in a circle with their torches. My dad very quickly turns around and gets back up into the station. He quickly reports in what he's seeing and then makes a report to the police. The police showed up about 30 or 40 minutes later due to the distance that they had to cover, and of course, they were long gone by the time the police got there. They still went out to investigate, and they found the remains of multiple animals and animal blood everywhere in that area. Now what's strangest of all is that they found wrote in blood on a piece of paper, "We know you're watching us." And after that, my dad quit that area immediately and didn't work as a ranger for a good number of years. He still has no idea to this day who they were or how they could have possibly spotted him in the darkness. He doesn't know how long they knew he was watching them for, or whether they knew he was in the tower, but he said he's never felt as confident being out there since as he did before this happened. A few years ago, I loaded a bunch of camping gear onto my bicycle and spent the better part of the next 7 months riding 5,300 miles around much of the US. At night, I most often preferred to wild camp, simply finding somewhere to disappear to into the woods, somewhere people are unlikely to find me and even less likely to care that I'm there. After a month or so of sleeping in the woods, I'd grown quite accustomed to the many nighttime sounds of the forest. The drowning of thousands of crickets and toads was a certainty, becoming almost a kind of white noise in the end. Now perhaps, maybe, I'd camp near a babbling creek or something similar. But it was always the highlight of the night. Though not particularly uncommon to hear the yipes and howls of distant coyotes. I fondly recall one night I inadvertently set up camp right between 2 owls who spent much of the night hooting back and forth, and at the very least, it wouldn't take much of a breeze to stir music from the trees. But then, there was one night in late September in the mountains of rural Montana shortly after dusk. I had turned out my light and lay down in the bed before coming to a disturbing realization. It's dead silent. There's no animals to be heard anywhere, not a single cricket. There wasn't even the slightest breeze through the trees, and this is in early autumn. There was just nothing to hear at all. It was terrifying. I can only describe it as the loudest silence I've ever heard. It almost felt as though the entire forest was hiding from an equally silent predator. There was the occasional snapping of a twig near my tent, a common sound normally lost in the canopy of other noises. It's like a gunshot. I slept terribly that night, and it was incredibly relieving to hear a birdsong accompany the first light of dawn. Now, I'm pretty much an accomplished outdoorsman. I'll be honest though, I still have a bit of anxiety when camping wild. I've had a few other similar nights in mind which inspire uneasy feelings, but none that really compared to this one. I think the weirdest part of it all was truly the not knowing. So there was this old lighthouse at the park I worked at as a ranger. People from North Jersey might actually be familiar with such. Next to it sits our visitor centre, formerly the lighthouse keeper's quarters. Last summer, I got put on the graveyard shift for a pay period. While out tooling around the fort, Park is an old army base, around 2 AM, changing all the Pokemon gyms to Team Mystic. So basically I noticed there was a light on in the second floor of the quarters. One of the interp rangers must have forgot to turn it off, I said to myself. So I go to head in, do a quick sweep of the building and turn it off. I go back outside, get in my car and I'm about to drive away. When I look back to the second floor, the light is back on and something moves across the window. My mind's eye saw a human figure, but I noped out of there so quick that it could have just been a bat or something, but I guess I'll never know. So, I was looking for new, out-of-the-way fishing holes. If I'm on a trip and have my gear, I'll pull out a map and look at different connecting waterways and try to find back roads that lead to new spots that few people know about. On one trip about 10 years ago, I'm in Western PA and looking for a road to connect me with this small and out-of-the-way stream that I found on the map. I'm in the country. It's not too desolate, but the houses are definitely getting further and further apart and looking more and more beat up. I summarise that I am really close to where this stream is supposed to be, so I turn down a dirt road that leads towards a tree line in the direction that I believe the stream is. The road starts out okay, but as soon as I pass into the tree line things get weird. It's mid-afternoon, but the canopy of trees is so thick that it suddenly looks like it's dusk. The roads are very desolate, and start closing in and eventually vanish. There are banks on either side of me, so I'm trying to figure out some kind of way around, seeing if there's a kind of old logging road or something that barely gets used. Now this road that I'm on keeps on getting worse and worse. Large rocks start appearing at random spots in the road, first sporadically and then more frequently. It's very unnatural looking. It looks like they were placed on purpose. Now my car's a 4-wheel drive, but I'm getting a little worried because the rocks are getting larger, and combined with this, how tight the road is, I'm starting to get a little bit worried. I'm now driving very slow to not pop a tyre or make a wrong move and get stuck on the bank or something. The road suddenly takes a very sharp left-hand and downward turn. I creep along this turn, but as I see the road continuing to do this weird trajectory, I get worried. At this moment, my gut starts talking to me and telling me to turn around, but it's at this point I realise I can't. The road is not wide enough to do a 3-point turn. I could chance it, but I don't want to get my front end caught on something pushing over the bank or my back end going off in the other direction. I say to myself, just keep on going. There's going to be enough room. I'll be able to turn around quickly. As I make my way round, there seems to be a side road that I should be able to take, but then I notice something odd. It just looks like garbage, bottles, boxes, wrappers, etc. Then I start seeing toys, kids' toys, and lots of them, an uncomfortable amount. Then I start seeing clothing, some old looking and some more modern. They're very weathered and tattered. The amount of clothes I'm seeing actually increases, and then I start to see mattresses. Not one random mattress, but lots, and all over the place. They are dirty with dark stains on them. My gut is now screaming at me to get out of here and turn around while I can. While I'm sitting there trying to figure out my next move, I get the feeling that I'm being watched. The feeling then hits me and I audibly yell out, "No." I then slam the car in reverse, dodging all of the random rocks and stuff on the way back now, and out of the sharp turn until eventually it levels out again. I say, God, screw this, and risk making the 3-point turn. My back end goes slightly off the bank and I slam back into drive and throw myself forward onto the road, and out of whatever the hell I just discovered. I have no clue what I come across that day, but I guess the best case scenario is it was some kind of drug den. But God knows, I still get shivers thinking about it now. So, not my story but my dad's. First off, let me explain that my dad is a huge skeptic. He was a military man for most of his life and doesn't really scare easily. When he was young, my grandparents sent him off to military school. He would grow up there and truthfully spend a lot of time out in the woods around the campus. He and his friends would drink in the woods and camp. So one particular night around the fire, the guys are telling ghost stories and trying to scare each other. The guys laughed off the spooky stories, but my dad said everyone was just a little spooked. Of course no one admits it. So they put out the fire and packed up for the night. The campus was at the top of the hill and the woods are at the bottom. The guys start heading up the hill when my dad felt everyone behind him stop. So my dad looks up to the top of the hill and he can make out someone at the very top, standing on the inside of the fence about 6 feet tall. This thing's head was resting on the top and its arms were hanging over it, almost like it was just resting on it while watching the guys make it to the top of the hill. They all froze. At first they're like, oh god, we got caught sneaking out. Then one of my dad's buddies yells out, hey, we're just checking out the campus, sir, thinking it's a drill sergeant maybe, but no response came. Well, we're all screwed here, my dad thought. As they get about halfway up the hill, my dad said the hair on the back of his neck stood up. The thing literally hasn't moved or responded whatsoever, it's just stayed there perfectly in place. When all of a sudden it screeched, my dad said it sounded like a mountain lion which they have in the area, but it was clearly coming from this thing. It started to climb the fence, which it did with ease like a spider. The guys wasted no time whatsoever back into the woods screaming and trying to push each other out of the way. My dad hid in a tree with a buddy and the other guys hid in some bush by the creek. They actually stayed there until the sun came out. My dad said the night was sleepless. They heard branches breaking all night and the same screeching as before. My dad said it is the most scared he's ever been. The guys never really talked about it and they all agreed what they saw was the same thing. He told me this story once and I could tell how scared he was just by the manner of which the story was told. So, I went camping with a friend in an area of British Columbia with grizzly bears, black bears and cougars. While sitting at the campfire after sunset as it's getting dark, we heard a sort of grunting/growling noise coming from the bushes not far from our campsite. We ignored the first one or two, but after the noise kept occurring every couple of minutes it had our attention. We went to look around to see if we could fully identify what was making the noise and hopefully scare it off. The noise then continued for a few minutes and eventually becomes louder. We assume the source of the noise is coming closer to us and the adrenaline is pumping now. It's worth mentioning that we all had a knife on us each, as we'd forgotten to bring bear spray and don't have any guns. The next thing we know, we heard a sound from behind us which I can only describe as an entire tree getting ripped off the ground, split in two and thrown again. Then dead silence. We sprint and climb to get back in the car, peeing ourselves honestly, so scared, peering out into the darkness trying to spot any movement but we don't see any. We never saw a glimpse of whatever made that sound, and the next morning we searched intensely but can't find any signs of what could have caused this. I still have no idea what it was to this day. So I was walking part of the Appalachian Trail. I come around a corner and see a mum of black bear playing with two cubs. No biggie, I just turn around and go back. I go back around the corner to see the other cub scrounging around on the trail, and suddenly I realise that I've become in between both the mama bear and her cubs. Terrain is too rough to leave the trail. I have to go another way. I might have to jump off a cliff to get away from this. I climb a small cliff and wait for the bears to leave. Now, at one point they're literally 30 feet away from me, eventually wandering off. I have to sit there for over an hour to wait for my heart rate to come down, and I always carry bear spray with me now. I was like 10 or 11 and was in the middle of the woods behind my grandpa's ranch with my two cousins. It was just after lunch and it was light out. We were poking at a dead animal with some sticks when we saw an alien or some kind of monster. I don't know what the hell it was. It was white and had big eyes and tilted its head very slightly when we saw it. I was too busy screaming and running for my life to get a good look at what it was, but that's what I saw, just kind of crouching there by the big tree staring at us, and all three of us saw it. We got back to the ranch and we were all crying and screaming, so my uncle took his shotgun and told us, "Tell him where it is." I didn't want to go back there, and neither did my little cousin, but my older cousin agreed as long as he could get a shotgun too. So we went back there, and of course there's nothing there. Nobody believes us, and to this day my uncle insists that we must have seen some kind of animal, but there is no way that's possible unless it was a deformed hairless monkey. It didn't look like any of those grey or green aliens really. It was kind of triangular and the eyes were round. The closest thing I can think of is kind of like a praying mantis, but it was the size of a small child and its eyes are pure white. Now, I didn't see any limbs or anything like that, but I can remember just how weird this thing looked, and it had a really big head and smallish torso. I don't know what this is, but even thinking of it now freaks me out. Oh, how it feels to be lost in the middle of nowhere with no idea where you are or how to get back. So, I'd like to share you my story. Now, my father was a park ranger, and apparently his dad was too, so my father and grandfather would often lecture me on the dangers of being out in the middle of nowhere by yourself, and how you have to be so careful because you don't know who's out there or what could happen. But me being a younger kid at the time, that did not bother me one bit. My mindset was, well, the further out into the woods I go, the more chance of adventure there's going to be for me. So, I'd always like to go wandering off a little further than where I was supposed to go. You know, just kind of like typical kid stuff, I guess. But looking back on it now, it's much, much stupider. And of course, I was kind of blind to any stranger danger at the time. But I digress too much now, so I'd like to get to my story. Now, this isn't set in a beautiful, picturesque summer's day. No, this is set in the middle of a cold October month in winter. Now, at the time I'd finished school, and I wasn't working, and to be honest I didn't really know what I wanted. I used to work in some old shop somewhere. It was basically a big surplus store, and I really liked the owner and got on with him well there. I worked with him for a little while, but I had to quit because it was God. I can't put into words how bored I would get if I was in the back room on my own. I'd have to do work in there for 2 or 3 hours at a time. The thing was, customers would come in the front, but nobody would really want to talk to me, so I'd get really bored. Now, my grandparents kicked up a riot when I wanted to quit. They kind of still had the more older mindset that you have to keep a job, you don't know how quick they're going to come, but God, working for $6 an hour, or less I think, is not worth it. Especially once you finish school and you really want to have a good time. So yeah, I basically didn't know what I wanted. I wasn't really a big fan of what was being offered in school, and I'd been to the college open day things, but it really put me off, to be honest. The things they were showing me looked incredibly boring, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So, having my adventure walks was one of my favourite things. I guess now it probably was out of pure boredom, but at the time it was the opposite. I eventually did become bored of being out in the woods on my own because after a while you kind of need more company, but it's what I did at the time. For me it was probably a good thing going in more winter months because I could kind of get away from everyone, and at times that was just what I wanted, just to be away and with myself for a while. So, I say bye mum, I'm going out, and she says please promise me you won't be too far but you have to be back in time for dinner. I say yeah, don't worry, I won't. that was no issue. Whenever my mum made my dinner, it would always be too hot, so I wouldn't always end up eating it all. So I set out. I go across a small stream, and I'm walking along a lake not far from where I live. Now the tree lines are absolutely beautiful here, and you have to be quite careful not to fall in the water. I have my raincoat on because, yes, you guessed it, it's raining a lot now. And I just take a few seconds just to appreciate how beautiful the rainfall is onto the lake. I always used to think when I was younger these were some kind of animals, and my dad would used to joke that it's some kind of fish trying to get air, and me being stupid would believe him and beg him to go fishing to try and capture some of the fish. I'd even put my hands in trying to capture things, and my dad would just laugh. Yeah, sometimes he could be quite funny like that. So, for this particular adventure, I don't really have a direction. I just kind of wanted to get away from everything and the responsibilities of life, you know. I say that, it's not really like I had many back then, but God did it feel like it for me. So, I continue walking while carefully avoiding different puddles and things. The leaves were kind of like a dark orange or red colour, I guess, and most of the trees themselves were barren of life. It kind of set a tone. It wasn't too far away from Halloween, and I actually kind of felt like it was a bit of a themed walk, so I guess it was good. So, just to the left of me is this beautiful lake, and to the right is a more dense forest. I eventually say goodbye to the lake as I continue on my walk. I'm basically following one of the streams uphill a bit, which is a direction I don't usually head in. Now the only annoying thing about doing this is that I got really wet really quick because of the water. Now, as I continue up, I'm careful not to slip and fall on any of the mossy rocks. I eventually make it back up onto a big path, which I know sometimes people like to jog down, but not very often. It's quite a muddy track now, and I have to duck under the trees, which annoys me because I already have quite bad posture, even back then. The low-hanging branches keep slapping me in the face too, which is really annoying, but I continue. I decide to take a turn off of the normal path and go into the woods themselves a bit. I mean actually off the path. I eventually come up to a small bridge that I need to cross over, and this should lead me slightly further away from people. Just to the left of me is a continuation of the stream and the right, and I take a few seconds just to take in how beautiful everything is here. I continue, and I start to press quite deep into the woods. Now it's not dark, but I guess because of the clouds stopping any light piercing through, it's starting to look quite dark. But I know I've still got quite a good few hours of daylight, which is important because then I can be back in time before my mum gets me. Strangely, I notice a very bright orange tree up ahead of me. This is far brighter than any of the other ones I found around me, which I think is quite odd. Then I notice there's a few more like this, but I don't think much of it. I take a while to appreciate, and I think to myself, God, I'm so lucky to be out here and away from everyone. I guess my mind kind of gets lost into the overthinking patterns, where I'm trying to think of what to do, what not to do, and what to chase. I know that I'm definitely on a different path from most people, but I don't know, I kind of just feel a bit like, I'm not sure what I want to do with school. I know I don't really want to study, but there's not much for me to do. I don't find much of anything interesting, really. I had a couple of friends at the time, but they really weren't the greatest, and they weren't necessarily people you could ask for advice. If you wanted advice about one thing, you get told something else, which would probably make your situation worse. Or sometimes when I would speak to my best friend, he would just ramble on and on about himself, and he wouldn't have paid any attention to what you said. He would literally wait for you to finish your sentence before immediately talking about himself, and it just kind of made me feel a bit trapped in my head. I didn't really want to talk to my parents about it. I kind of felt better talking to my friends, but like I said, I wouldn't really get much back in return. So yeah, here I am now, kind of getting lost in my own mind a bit, going deeper and deeper, ever so little, into the woods without realizing it. Now, a good indicator of being far away from normal is the fact that I haven't seen anyone. The rain will usually do this, but not to this degree. This was actually quite rare, to be honest. Again, I think this is odd, but here I am. So at this point, the rain started to slow down a little bit, which is quite nice, but I keep on getting hit in the face by random bits of water that are falling from the trees. Now weirdly, I come across an abandoned road that I've actually never seen before. It's weird because you can tell this has been abandoned for a long time, but there's definitely no cars that have been on it recently, but why have I never noticed it? I think this is odd. It's kind of like more of a dirt road, but it's weird, it just looked really out of place. Now at this point, I'm walking through some trees that have more life to them, and I guess they look really pretty compared to everything. And once again, I begin getting lost in my mind. Now, when I'm walking, I realise every so often that there's a strange flash of light just coming from the right side of my eyes. Now, I'm actually quite paranoid that maybe I've got some kind of mega migraine coming on or something's wrong with my eyes. It seems like it's during every second step that I notice this weird flash of light. I try my best to ignore it and continue walking, but I can't seem to. It's really bizarre, it literally is like if I step down hard enough it does something, I don't know, maybe nerve related, and causes my eyes to go weird. It's strange because when I decide to remain completely still, I can't really see much of anything. Everything is completely normal, and there's no flashes, so I continue with my walk. But every so often, I'm struck with that flashing light again, and it's actually starting to annoy me a bit. I think, oh god, well now. I've already had quite a bad issue with my vision before, and I don't really have the best eyes, so I truly don't want things to get any worse for me. But every so often, I'm convinced I'm seeing a strange flashing light coming out the right side of my vision, and it will not stop. It's bizarre too, because even if I try and stop and replicate the steps I was doing, there's no flashes now. But hey, this is a problem to worry about if it persists, I tell myself. Though in the back of my mind, truthfully, I'm a little worried. Now, eventually I make it up to a really nice spot not far from a beautiful body of water, and I take a few seconds just to sit here. I've realised now that I'm truly not sure where I've gotten to, but up ahead of me I see a small, kind of man-made bridge thing. There's no water running under the bridge, but you can see that these stones have been arranged specifically for you to go somewhere. This is really odd because there's no trail path up here, and I haven't seen anyone at all, so nobody else is up this way, and just ahead of it you can see a path. This is strange because again, it kind of looks like a path someone's made, but it looks like no one ever goes up here. Now, just off to the left of me, I can see a strange figure just off in the distance, somewhat behind a tree. It's really bizarre, but they seem to sink slowly down into water, and I can't tell what it is. I think this is probably just a tree or something, so I just continue onwards. I'm walking now, splashing into the water. I don't care because my shoes are very waterproof, but as I'm doing so, every so often that flash comes back again. This time it's dead ahead of me. Now this is really odd now. There shouldn't be any flashes in front of me, and the problem I had earlier is out of the right corner of my eye, in my peripheral vision, not directly in front of me. But every time I stop and strain, I can't see anything or anyone. Bizarre. Convinced that there's something wrong with my eyes, I decide that I'm just gonna see what's up here, then I'm gonna head back home. Now while walking, I can see the abandoned remains of a campsite from long ago. It's a tent which has all holes in it, and it kind of looks like an old military issue one, but somewhat older. It's quite bizarre being there. It looks very out of place, and there's not really any signs of any life around here. I'm definitely going up to something that somebody used to live in, but I don't know who or why. So, I just keep going. Now, while I'm walking, I slip slightly and have to grip a tree quickly just to steady myself. As I do so, I look up and there seems to be quite a large, abandoned house up ahead of me. I can't really see it well, but it's basically in a different direction that I'm heading. I decide to go and investigate because why not? I then take my first few steps in that direction and I hear a click sound now. It's not really like anything you'd be worried about, but it's quite a weird sound. It sounds like plastic being pressed down upon, but again, I don't give it much thought. I'm kind of just blinded to my problems ahead of me with my vision, thinking, oh god, am I going to lose some of my sight or what is this? And I start to panic a bit. Sometimes I can overthink about the smallest details, and that's basically what's happening, but I'm trying to put on a really brave face now. I continue walking, and there it is. It's not as big as I thought it was, but it's kind of like a big old cabin house thing. I don't know how to describe it. It doesn't look like anyone's been there recently, but there is a small muddy path that leads up to it, and I've come this far, so who am I not to continue on my adventure? So, I continue walking, this time sloshing in the leaves next to the path. I don't want to get my shoes too muddy even though they're waterproof because they're brand new pretty much, so I continue onwards. Now every so often I can see some kind of marking in the trees. It's almost like wooden carvings that almost look like they're there naturally, but you can tell they aren't. There's lots of lines and crosses on them, and this is weird. It's something I've not seen before. You can also see a rock formation that seems to channel some water stream down that's definitely man-made. I start to think maybe I've come up to some old logger's cabin and this is what they were looking for. Water. I don't know, it seems pretty bizarre. As I get closer and closer to the structure ahead of me, I have a feeling that maybe, just maybe, there's someone in there. I don't think it's entirely likely, however, and I continue going up to it, so I edge ever closer to this thing, not really thinking much of my surroundings. I eventually make it just outside of this cabin thing, and I just stand there for a moment, confused about what I'm seeing, and then my dad's voice kicks in my head. Son, what are you doing there? What have I told you before? I think, God, is this my dad really speaking to me or just my conscience? I look around and realise it's just in my mind, and my dad's advice has really struck to me now. I know I probably shouldn't explore this, but I've come this far now and I don't even know how to get back. Plus, if I ever wanted to go back to this place, it would probably be really difficult to find, so I decide that it's best for me to go on. I make my first few steps towards the porch area, and I try and look through the windows, but it's quite hard to see into this place. It's really quite a nice building, but it's gotta be probably 70 years old or so. It looks quite dated, and I just hope that the door opens. I give a quick hello, quite loudly, and I actually knocked on the door, half expecting somebody to open it, but nobody does. I think this is good because it's a sign I should be able to go in here without having too many issues. So I go ahead and try the door. Surprisingly, it does actually open just a bit. I have to force my way in somewhat, and I take my first step in. I go to call out again, but I stop myself thinking, if someone's in here, they've definitely heard me, but nobody's replied. I'm then met with a really weird smell, one that I've not really smelt before, and it's absolutely disgusting. It smells like somebody's put tons of waste into one area and burnt it, then repeated the same process 20 times. It was awful. It actually makes me put my shirt over my nose just so I don't have to smell it. Honestly, it was so bad. Now, this place looks like it's been abandoned long ago, but strangely there's some signs of life. There's a kettle and other cooking utensils that don't look so dirty like the rest of this place, and there is a mattress and a bed in another room, but I don't bother going through there. Now, the smell seems to get worse as I head into the hallway. I then realise that there's steps going down, and there's lights on strangely at the bottom, just enough to illuminate the bottom of the stairs. Again, the sense of adventure takes over, and my dad's voice is screaming in my head to get out of there, but I don't do that. I just continue on. Now, I take my first few steps and I have to be careful because my shoes are wet, so it makes me start to slip a little bit and I steady myself. I now realise what I'm looking at. There's a little tunnel system just ahead of me. Now, it's a very tight squeeze, but there's light coming from it, and I go for it. Now, the floor's pretty dirty but very dry, and the gap's not very big. I can just about fit through it, and I'm not really that big. I'm still slender to this day, but I kind of worm my way through. I'm actually becoming quite claustrophobic, but managed to calm myself down, and I eventually squeeze through the gap. I steady myself up and I look around, and honestly, I'm still not sure what to think of it now. There's a really large basement area that it opens up into, and it's not what you'd expect to find. No storage or boxes, no spare bedroom, no boiler system, no nothing. There's a very dated laboratory with all kinds of different specimens and things in dusty old jars that I can't really see well into. There's all kinds of chemical and things in vials everywhere. And strangely, there's no bad smell here, just the smell of chemicals. Now, it must have been powerful because I can smell everything through the sleeve of my shirt that's covering my nose. Now, this is really bizarre. It literally looks like some kind of mad scientist laboratory underground, but why would it be hidden like this? I don't know. Now, I quickly go to switch sides of what's covering my face from my right sleeve to my left because I want to open another door I can see, and as I do so, I'm suddenly struck with that smell once again. That disgusting smell which is more powerful than the chemical smell that I'm feeling right now burning through my nose. It's coming from the door ahead of me. I take one step closer to the door and I look behind myself. There's definitely nobody else here, right? I take a step closer and I put my hand on the door and crash. There's a loud sound from above me. I have to hit my arm to stop me screaming. I immediately withdraw from the door and stop dead in my tracks. I can hear something or someone walking around up ahead of me. Oh god, you're really in trouble now. There's no way that I'm gonna go through that door that I put my hand on before, but I'm certainly trapped now. I stop absolutely dead still for God knows how long, and I don't hear any other sounds. It now dawns on me that I probably shouldn't stay in this room for too long because of the chemical smell, and that I also need to try and get out without making any sound. I've become as quiet as I possibly can, and I slowly take one step forward. I slowly begin to crawl and make my way through that gap. I continue until I'm almost at the end of it and I hear a door close above. Oh good, someone must be leaving, I think to myself. I then push myself clear and start slowly making my way towards the steps, being as quiet as possible. I take my first step on and it makes a slight creak sound. I stop immediately, so angry that there's no way I can get up here quietly. I realise I'm gonna have to wait it out now, and hopefully this person is gone, whoever they are, or however many there are. I wait for probably an hour, but realistically 15 minutes because of the adrenaline, and I start to make another step up those stairs. I must have only got about halfway up when there's another loud creak. I realise now I don't really have the option to move back. I turn around and I'm sure I can hear the door creak from in the other room that I didn't open. Half expecting some kind of zombie to come out and come and get me, I start to power forward and get ahead, just making it to the top of the stairs. I take a look around and there's no one, luckily. I'm frozen in place but absolutely aware of the sounds coming from behind me. I then slowly make my way to the front door and carefully close it behind me, and that's when I hear it. A kind of scream sound that I've not heard before. I can't figure out the direction that it's coming from, but I then realise that there's something just up on the tree line. It's a very dark figure. I realise that it's a person with extremely disgusting clothes who looks impossibly tall. He was probably about 6 feet 4 or 5, but to me at that age was an absolute giant. I say, hey, and again there's that scream sound. I realise this is someone I can't reason with, and that's when he starts running. Without making another sound, I can see his lanky silhouette beckoning towards me with something in his hand. I'm frozen in fear until eventually something kicks in and I bolt into life. I have no idea what direction I'm going in, but I know I have to get away from this person. Suddenly, it becomes clear that I need to get out of here and I start sprinting into the woods. Now the problem is, I'm no longer on a path. I don't know what direction that I'm heading in, and I'm being hunted. I glance over my shoulder quickly, and I start crying a little bit. I can't see this person just yet, but I can see the cabin. I start sprinting and slowly making my way across different puddles and things, trying my best not to be heard and not to be seen. I can see more of the strange markings on the trees, and as I'm on my journey, I can see something just off to the left. It looks like another campsite, but this one's covered in bags, and that smell hits me again. Even at my most fear, I still realise how disgusting this thing smells. I eventually realise that I've come to an area where the trees are going to be really difficult to pass, and this area is very steep and probably really going to slow me down. I'm frozen for a second, and I look to my left and see a lake. There's a dated sign that says danger, deep water. I've realised I can't go this way. I look back and I can hear him screaming again, not far away now. I can't see where he is, but he definitely knows where I am. I realise that my only option is to try and go up this steep hill, and I basically have to kind of swing from tree to tree to make it up here, half slipping the whole time. I scream, "Who are you and what do you want?" And there's silence now. Annoyingly, the sounds of the rain are basically covering up whoever this is chasing me, or however many there are. I've only seen one so far, but I have a feeling there might be more people. I make it up to kind of a flat area, and I have to catch my breath for a few seconds. Just as I'm doing so, there's that flashing again. I've realised now that it's probably the flash of a camera, and something is definitely going on here. I don't know if this is the same person chasing me as before, but my god is it weird. Now I know that somebody was taking pictures of me earlier, or at least that's what I think it is, or maybe it's my eyes going bad, but I don't know. I luckily make it to a more downhill area now that I know I can pick up the pace on, and being slender comes as an advantage in this situation because I can basically dart in between the different trees. I start saying aloud, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry, Grandpa. I should have listened to you both. I don't know what I'm doing out here on my own. I'm not a big, strong ranger like you. I'm sorry." Really thinking these are going to be my last words. Crazy thoughts to have at such a young age. I wasn't necessarily annoyed at myself for going on the adventure, just more annoyed for being dishonest to my parents. I thought if I didn't make it, I would have hated the fact that I'd lied to them. Now, I can no longer hear the screaming coming from behind me, or see the flashes, so I start to walk a bit slower, desperate to get my breath back and suffering from quite a large adrenaline dump, feeling kind of weird. I keep walking, and I've realised that if I continue going downhill, I should eventually make it to a larger bridge which should be closer to civilization. I start following the edge of the lake, every so often looking behind me, and now at kind of like a light jogger's pace as I start to pick up speed again. I've probably been on the run for a good 20 or 25 minutes, which is an insanely long time to be running and sprinting through a forest going up and down hill. My legs actually feel like they're jelly, and I'm really scared that they're going to completely give way at some points and that I'm never going to make it back home. But luckily, just off in the distance is that bridge, and honestly it looks like the gates of heaven to me at this point. It honestly felt like I was taken to another world when I saw this and snapped back out of this crazy dream one. I then go as quick as I possibly can for another good 5 or 10 minutes, eventually making it over to that bridge. I'm too scared to look behind me once more. I've realised that my only option to really get out of here now is to wait for a car, and I stick my thumb up like I've seen in the films, and eventually a car stops for me. I quickly jump in, and they ask what's wrong. I say, nothing, I'm just a bit far from home, and I say where you need to take me. And then the driver just looks at me and says, "Well, you're a long way from home, but don't worry, I'm heading over that way. I'll happily give you a ride there." And I kind of zoned out and didn't say anything for the next hour or so. I then ask how much further is it, and the driver says about another 50 minutes, and it hits me just how far away I've gone from the area that I knew. I must have been out for hours, but I guess your time kind of gets distorted when you're in a traumatic situation. Eventually, they drop me just off where I can quickly depart and jog the rest of the way home. I say thank you, and I do that. I never even caught the name of this driver, but I really wish I did because I'd love to thank them now. They probably ended up saving my life by dropping me off. I just wish I could have told them what happened, but I just couldn't. I was too scared. I eventually got home and surprisingly had only missed dinner by about 10 minutes, so my mum wasn't too angry. Now my mum would have done me for absolute murder had she have known what had happened, and God knows what my dad would have done, so this story remained a secret up until now when I decided to share it. Now, I don't know exactly where the area is. It would be impossible for me to find now, as I'd moved town and so did my parents. But my God, I don't know what I discovered that day, but I can only imagine it was either some kind of drug den, or maybe somebody was doing God knows what out in those woods. I just hope to God that nobody else ever had to discover it like me, but I hate how stupid I was for going to investigate.